Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. The purpose of this hearing today is to identify structural challenges and functional deficiencies that impede the Department of State's ability to fulfill its mission and to work to find solutions to those issues. And I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. As I said, I called this hearing really to establish a simple fact. The State Department has many broken parts, and it's been, in many ways, a broken part of our government for many years. It's been too big. It's had no clear mission or definition for public diplomacy. Has very little command and control over the dollars that it sends across the globe. It's spent your tax dollars in ways that would have been better if the State Department just lit the money on fire in many cases. Right now, more than 80% of the State Department is not authorized by Congress. That includes Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation with a budget of $57 million and 247 employees. The Bureau of International Organizations with a budget of $90 million and 370 employees. The Bureau of Administration with a budget of $394 million and a staff of 700. Now, despite 80% of it not being authorized, the State Department's bureaus, offices, and programs, they continue to grow each and every year. Last year, the State Department employed more than 80,000 people across the globe. Between the year 2000 and the year 2024, the State Department's budget grew from roughly $9.5 billion to more than $55 billion over the course of that time. Where did that money go? Does our foreign policy feel like it's 5 times more effective as we've spent 5 times more dollars? Instead, we've had a State Department with plenty of duplicative programs, but again, not a clear mission and a clear outline on how to go out there and affect the missions positively on behalf of the American people and all of our interest. The largest operation of the State Department in any of our lifetimes was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was an abysmal failure. The State Department failed to plan everything from how many people would be requesting visas to how many people would be needed to process those visas, and 1,000 other things. The State Department is too big, and it's also unaccountable because we've not conducted a comprehensive, standalone reauthorization since 2002. It's also prioritizing the wrong things, in my opinion. That is why we saw American dollars going out the door to foreign companies, foreign countries, foreign NGOs, and foreign adversaries like the Taliban, with less oversight than it takes the average American citizen to get a driver's license at the DMV. Don't take my word for it. Listen to what the State Department's funded with your tax dollars, and many of you heard me give lists of hundreds and hundreds of items. I'll list just a couple. $14 million in cash vouchers for migrants at our southern border, $24,000 for a national spelling bee in Bosnia, $1.5 million to mobilize elderly, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, and intersex people to be involved in the Costa Rica political process. $20,000 for a drag show in Ecuador, $32,000 for an LGBTQ comic book in Peru. I would challenge anybody in here to refute that American tax dollars were not spent in this way. I don't see anybody refuting that. I have hundreds of more examples of these, if not thousands. We have proof that these things happened. We have the documents, we have the photos, we have the receipts. These things are too stupid for us to try and make up, really. But this is not about scoring political points with each of those, otherwise I'd give the full list. These programs were funded with American tax dollars because somewhere, some person down the line at the State Department thought that programs like that were actually public diplomacy. This spending was not life-saving. It didn't make American citizens visiting those countries safer or American businesses operating there more prosperous or a better partner. It didn't bring any of the countries in which the money was spent closer to America. In fact, many of these countries actively opposed what the State Department was actually doing. Yet State Department officials thought this was public diplomacy and exactly what America should be doing. Again, I personally disagree with that definition of public diplomacy, but we should have this debate, and we should figure out what American tax dollars should and should not be used for abroad. And that's what the debate about a State Department reauthorization is all about. That's what this hearing and a reauthorization process will accomplish. We need to restore command and control over the State Department so that you don't have USAID betraying its core mission by funding an $850,000 transgender job fair in Bangladesh or a $15 million in condoms to the Taliban. That did nothing to bolster America's national security. Even worse, the lack of accountability allows USAID to create a bloated industry where DC contractors profited off sky-high overhead costs while people most in need received very little compared to what those contractors received. Even USAID admitted that just 12% of its grants went directly to local organizations. This lack of accountability at USAID is exactly why the agency needed to be brought back under the control of the State Department. And this is an idea that was embraced by Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton and President Joe Biden, and it's moved that we should make permanent in our reauthorization bill. The State Department has been broken. That has been true. But it's also our responsibility as the Foreign Affairs Committee to fix those issues permanently. Until now, the State Department has never shrunk. It's never downsized its budget or eliminated an office or an envoy. President Trump, Secretary Rubio, and Doge are already making changes, and they're looking at us to be a partner in that process. And we look forward to seeing Secretary Rubio to speak to us about that later in the month, next month. The only way that we do this as authorizers in the U.S. House of Representatives is by conducting that first full, comprehensive State Department reauthorization again since 2002. I thank you all for your participation in this hearing. I thank our witnesses for their testimonies when they give them. I thank the ranking member and all of your members for their attendance today. And the ranking member Meeks, representative from New York, is now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Mast, Chairman Mast. And I want to say thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us here today. As a member of this committee, it is our duty to reauthorize the State Department regularly, just as Congress does with respect to the Department of Defense. As chairman of the 117th Congress, I made it a priority to pass the first State Department reauthorization in 18 years, doing so in a bipartisan way with then Ranking Member McCaul. That's because both Democrats and Republicans believed that it was in the best interest of the American people and the U.S. national security for Congress to ensure our diplomatic and development professionals have all the tools that they need to succeed. And let me just say, I praise all of those professionals that work for the State Department, that work for USAID. They are individuals who are focused and dedicated their lives to the United States of America. They are of the top and most respected individuals. As we salute our military, we need to salute those that work for the State Department and USAID for their mission and the sacrifices that they make every day to their families and others for the benefit of those in the citizens of the United States of America. So, and I believe that both Democrats and Republicans believe it was in the best interest of the American people and national security for Congress to ensure our diplomatic and development professionals have all of the tools that they need to succeed. So while I appreciate that this hearing was called and agree with the need for Congress to regularly authorize the State Department, Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid this committee's actions, this Congress, have run counter to that goal. After all, how can we engage in a serious bipartisan conversation about strengthening the State Department and other agencies when Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Secretary Rubio have eviscerated the very department and instruments of national security we're supposed to support, while not being called even once for a hearing before this committee? And while I appreciate the witnesses that we have here, and I know that we have proposed Secretary Rubio coming in on the 21st, we've not had any hearing with anyone from the agencies. And we appreciate the words that the chairman comes up with about all of his statistics, but the ones that should be before us should be people from the administration. And we have not had one. So you can't remodel a home after you burn it to the ground. And Congress's legislative role should not be to simply rubber stamp the arsonists at work. This is a profound moment, I believe, a moment of shame for the Republican Party, as its members sit silently while Secretary Rubio allows Elon Musk and his army of teenagers who have no foreign policy or even government experience or expertise to dismantle the very agencies that they have supported in the past. The United States Agency for International Development, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, just to name a few, have all been met with a hatchet job for no reason. Meanwhile, Secretary Rubio and many of my Republican colleagues who've in the past understood their value, if you talk to them in the past, they did, failed to speak up, or worse, contort themselves to justify the administration's actions. There is no greater demonstration of this incredible cowardice, in my opinion, than that of Secretary Rubio, who knows this is wrong. Listen to his words when he was in the Senate, and listen to it now. You would not think it's the same individual. He knows it's wrong, but would rather sit atop a kingdom of ash than defend the work he once praised. I had hoped that Secretary Rubio would at least try to protect the Department of USAID and their workforces who've dedicated their lives to serving the American people. Instead, he stood by while Musk and Morocco and Doge illegally gutted USAID, a statutory agency, and condemned millions of people around the world to disease, starvation, and death by slashing foreign assistance, forfeiting U.S. global leadership in the process. So, see, I'm out of time, and almost out of time, but I will just end this with this paragraph. The wanton destruction didn't end with USAID or Pete Morocco's exit. Most recently, Secretary Rubio gave this committee just 25 minutes before announcing a sweeping dismantling of our soft power tools in the name of state reauthorization. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks. Other members of the committee are reminding that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. The Honorable James F. Jeffrey, retired career Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Department of State. The Honorable David Hale, former Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. And the Honorable Uzra Zaya, President and CEO of Human Rights First. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us, and we're grateful to have you all speak with us today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for members' questions. And I now recognize Ambassador Jeffrey for his opening statement.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, I appreciate deeply the opportunity to address this committee on such an important issue. To save state, we must prioritize national security objectives, consolidate state operations, and empower regional bureaus. I have submitted a statement for the record, which I will summarize now.
Sir, could you maybe pull that microphone a little bit closer for everybody?
How's that, sir?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. But first, let me express my admiration for my former State Department colleagues who, as Representative Meeks noted, serve our country with the same dedication I saw with my soldiers 50 years ago. Unfortunately, their success is hampered by structural problems in the State Department, which has drifted over multiple administrations from its core mission, the relentless, rigorous pursuit of national interests. For example, Congress tasked state to develop strategic plans to be consistent with overall administration policy. Here is the framework chart for state's latest plan from 2022. By then, the Biden and earlier Trump administrations had made clear that great power competition was our most important objective. Yet the State Department plan has lead allies and partners to address shared challenges and competitors, prevent, deter, and resolve conflicts as only one of 19 objectives under 5 goals, listed as the 4th of 5 under the goal of global challenges. Obviously, Secretary Blinken and other secretaries devote almost all of their time to national security, but formal plans have consequences, and this mishmash of objectives dulls states' focus. Another example, the 2024 report by the Commission on the National Defense Strategy noted that Compared to DoD and the intelligence community, the State Department lacks a similar level of planning, joint operations, and shared undertaking of national security, end quote. To rectify this, state must more closely align its strategic plan to the current national security strategy, be established as a national security agency, and develop formal planning, institutions, doctrine, and training. The next problem is dispersion of diplomatic activities to other agencies. I applaud the return of USAID to its roots in the Department of State before the 1960s. I would add the Foreign Commercial Service and the military equipment programs under the NDAA Section 1209 that DoD now has. In contrast, I would transfer the visa mission to the Department of Homeland Security. States' geographic bureaus are the main operational arms of the Secretary. These bureaus, however, need major modifications to so function. Secretaries Christopher through Blinken, when confronted with a crisis, be it North Korea, Bosnia, Venezuela, Iraq, Syria, Iran, and more, assigned responsibility not to the Geographic Bureau and its Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary, but to a senior, non-confirmed special envoy, reporting directly to the Secretary. I have been such an envoy 3 times, and I can attest this is a bad situation, but it keeps being repeated because it's the least bad approach, given the restraints with the regional bureaus. First, they must balance management of large organizations with their diplomacy mission, and that mission is spread between and blurred traditional state-to-state diplomacy and expectations for transformational nation building. One example is a human rights report required by Congress. This is for Bulgaria. It's 53 pages long. I did the first one in 1980. It was about 5 pages. Second, the bureaus have 8 layers between the desk officer for a given country and the secretary. When I was in the National Security Council, we had only 2 layers between such desk officers and the top. Third, bureaus' country responsibilities should be aligned with DoD's combatant commands. Fourth, even after the state reorganization just announced, the geographic bureaus are overwhelmed by 10 global special activities bureaus and 5 offices overseen by 3 undersecretaries and a new assistant SAR. That element of the State Department needs further downsizing and structural changes to curtail its interference with geographic bureaus' diplomatic missions and their communications to department leaders. Personnel is policy, and much of the blur and baggage within state flows from confusion about the roles of Foreign Service officers as manager, or global change officer, or diplomat. Finally, whatever one administration changes by executive order, the next can reverse, and thus congressional action for reform is imperative. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Jeffrey. I now recognize Ambassador Hale for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks and the rest of the committee for the opportunity to be with you. I've retired after 4 decades as a Foreign Service officer at the State Department, so I really do welcome the opportunity to share my experiences and do what we can to improve the situation I think, Mr. Chairman, you have aptly described. I strongly support the idea of restoring the proper order of relationships between Congress and the State Department and the administration in terms of the authorization process in the bill. And I also strongly support the idea of revising and reforming the organizational and structural issues at the State Department. I would underscore, though, that these kinds of reforms can only be as good as the leaders and staff who are assigned to undertake them at the State Department. So I would urge you, after you're done with the business before the committee of the authorization bill, to not get distracted and to be persistent in making sure that state follows up and that they have the leadership and the resources and the mindset and the training that are needed in order to do whatever the authorization bill and the reorganization of the department demands of them. And that includes taking a very deep look at the way in which we hire, train, promote, and separate our staff, and making sure that the services, the civil service and the foreign service, have the skills to meet the emerging and future needs that are identified in those reorganization charts. And I look at the latest, I don't know if it's an accurate one, but the reorganization chart that was leaked recently or released recently from the State Department, And it's got offices there that I warmly welcome in terms of emerging problems, science and technology, economics. But I would ask you to turn to the Foreign Service Institute and make sure that we're actually training people that can do those jobs. Because in my experience, we are falling short in that area. I would also look forward, of course, to discussing, based on my own experience, how we can do a better job in all of the topics that you raise. And all of it, in my mind, means really going back to basics. What is the Foreign Service all about? And what is the State Department meant to do? And by having a stronger connection between Congress and the State Department, we can make sure that we're following the direction of the American people, which is what service is all about. So I look forward to your questions and the opportunity to discuss these topics further.
Thank you, Ambassador Hale. I now recognize Ms. Zaya for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Meeks, for the invitation to testify today. And I, too, am a retired former Foreign Service officer, as well as the current president and CEO of Human Rights First. Congressional oversight and guidance are vital to the work of the State Department as it navigates complex and overlapping crises around the world. State authorization can and should rebuild bipartisan consensus around the imperative for cost-effective diplomacy and foreign assistance that sustains U.S. human rights and humanitarian leadership and enhances American security, prosperity, and well-being. In that bipartisan spirit, I'd like to underscore 3 key points. First, investing in U.S. human rights and humanitarian leadership makes Americans safer and more secure from autocratic overreach and transnational threats. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine upended global food and energy security and threatened neighbors, including treaty allies. But Putin was thwarted thanks to the courage of the Ukrainian people and transatlantic solidarity, including vital U.S. humanitarian, democracy, and accountability support. Similarly, when the U.S. pushes back on transnational repression and gross violations of human rights like extrajudicial killings, torture, religious persecution, and arbitrary detention, it fosters safety for Americans at home and abroad. When U.S.-supported peace processes include women and civil society, it increases the chances that resulting accords break cycles of conflict, keeping our troops out of harm's way. When the U.S. enforces human rights standards in our foreign security assistance, it creates more reliable partners and upholds U.S. law. Second, U.S. human rights and humanitarian leadership makes our nation more prosperous. That's why state long partnered with the Department of Labor and others to target forced labor, purge it from U.S. supply chains, and raise labor standards abroad. Recent slashing of programs supporting these activities hurts American workers and companies. Corruption is also a major barrier for U.S. companies investing and doing business overseas. This makes all the more concerning the current administration's suspended enforcement of core anti-U.S. corruption law. U.S. humanitarian leadership saves lives and advances U.S. security and prosperity by reducing onward migration to the United States and upholding legal pathways that enrich U.S. society. State Department advocacy for shared responsibility on migration in our hemisphere helped nearly 2 million Venezuelan refugees find protection in Colombia and expanded asylum access in countries like Costa Rica and Mexico. U.S.-based refugee resettlement, now frozen and decimated at home, helps ensure other nations continue to host the vast majority of the world's refugees, but has also delivered billions of dollars in net gains to the U.S. economy. Third, and finally, proposals to slash state personnel bureaus and offices and integrate virtually all functions into regional bureaus will hobble U.S. human rights and humanitarian leadership. With due respect to my former colleagues, over my 3 decades at state, I often saw regional bureaus shy away from difficult conversations or actions on human rights, even with U.S. adversaries. That's why Congress created an Assistant Secretary for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs and the DRL Bureau, now being stripped of its policy role, programs, and much of its personnel after decades of bipartisan support holding the world's worst regimes to account, rallying Democratic partners, and providing life-saving support to thousands of human rights defenders worldwide. Meanwhile, elimination of the Conflict Stabilization Bureau and offices of global criminal justice and global women's issues will shutter negotiation support that helped push ceasefire agreements over the finish line, and accountability efforts for the world's worst human rights violators, and curtail U.S. leadership combating gender-based violence globally. These cuts also erase department leads on bipartisan legislation to modernize U.S. foreign policy, such as the Global Fragility Act and the Women, Peace, and Security Act. Vague consolidation plans combined with an unexplained 15% cut in domestic state personnel and dissolution of USAID also bode poorly for effectiveness. Consolidation of the Office of Trafficking in Persons into the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration ignores JTIP's statutory mandate and leadership implementing the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Absorption of complex USAID disaster and other operations into an attenuated PRM bureau is a recipe for failure. Oversight should ensure consolidation is not a cover for collapsing U.S. humanitarian and development leadership as we know it. I would urge you to raise the concerns I've shared today with the current administration before its plan becomes a fait accompli, and I also encourage you to seek the views of subject matter experts and international civil society leaders. They will remember if the United States was on their side.
I thank each of you for your opening statements. I'm now going to move to questioning. I'm going to begin with Chairman Emeritus McCaul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me commend you for this noble effort. There's a reason why it hasn't happened since 2002. As Ranking Member Meeks mentioned, we worked together on state authorizations, but not a full scale. Oftentimes the Senate is the problem, even if we can get it through the House. But I do think it's important because, you know, when the diplomats fail, we go to war. That's what this committee is all about. This committee has the authority, the obligation to deal with issues of war and peace. I've often thought, why cannot this committee pass an authorization like the National Defense Authorization Bill that the Armed Services Committee passes? Instead, about 25% of the NDAA comes out of this committee. So we use that vehicle to pass our authorizations. But if we fail to authorize, then we do abdicate our Article 1 responsibilities. And we also don't have the proper capabilities to do the oversight that's necessary. If we authorize something within state, whoever's in the executive, it makes it more difficult for the executive to act against the Article 1 branch of Congress, no matter whether that's a Democrat or Republican administration. And it is the Congress acting under its constitutional responsibilities. So again, I applaud you for this. I think this is going to be a healthy discussion. I guess my question, and lastly, I have to say, just like the NDAA, it will be impossible for us to pass a state authorization, both House and Senate, if it's not bipartisan. And that's true with most legislation. In my 20 years, is you can have messaging bills, but if you really want to get things done, especially on an authorization like this, I think the NDAA is a good model to examine where House and Senate, bipartisan, work together to get a good piece of legislation done. But Mr. Chairman, we don't have to rely on the NDAA to do all of our authorizations of state. And that's what has happened since 2002, and it is a difficult process. And I want to ask all three of you, in the limited time, what are the long-term risks to our U.S. global leadership if Congress continues to operate without a regular reauthorization of the State Department?
I'll start, Congressman. Without your input into a tightly organized Department of State, it will not reach its potential to coordinate, which is its core purpose, military power, economic power, values, and our partners and friends around the world into a coherent effort to advance the safety and the prosperity of the American people, which is the core goal. The military puts great effort into this in a way that, having been in both institutions as a career officer, I don't see to the same degree in the State Department. Anything you folks here can do to help that would be much appreciated.
If I could give a good example, Mr. Chairman, is under the first Trump administration, Mike Pompeo set up an office to deal with emergency contingencies in response to what he foresaw happening in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the Biden administration eliminated that office. So when Afghanistan fell in a disastrous way, that office was not there to respond. And you know why? Because it wasn't authorized by Congress. Any more thoughts?
No, I think that's an excellent example. I would, in addition to what you've said and what Jim has said, I would say that one of the problems also is that the State Department tends to go on autopilot when it hasn't gotten the direction that it needs, and that's a natural bureaucratic instinct, but it needs to be fought all the time. And I think the annual authorization process can help make sure that the State Department is actually changing as events change and as requirements change. I think the more fundamental thing in my mind is that the longer the State Department goes without an authorization bill, the more detached it is from the will of the American people. And so we need to make sure that Congress is playing its role to wake us up and hold us accountable. I'm no longer, when I say us, it's no longer me, but I mean the organization I was part of for my entire adult life, and responsive, and that we have an opportunity also to tell our story as to why we want to do things a certain way, and have that debate with the authorizers and appropriators.
My time's expired with the excellent point about the will of the American people. Otherwise, it's acting in an autocratic way without the will of the American people. I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize Ranking Member Meeks.
Thank you. And I actually don't disagree with almost anything that Mr. McCaul has said. In fact, that's a big concern of mine, because what we've seen before us is not reform. It's abandoning decades of bipartisan support for centering human rights and democracy in our foreign policy, without consultation, without engagement, and without any regard for Congress's constitutional role as a co-equal branch of government. To this day, Secretary Rubio refuses to follow the law and consult with Congress. And we have no reason to believe that will change. In the weeks ahead, we fully expect him to endorse the next chapter of Project 2025, which will closing hundreds of critical offices and potentially dozens of overseas posts, gutting the department's workforce, and slashing the budget, all of which will leave America weaker and more isolated. In fact, China and Russia will continue to celebrate, as they've done so almost every day since January 20th. And what Mr. McCaul said, I have a long track record working with any administration that wants to strengthen our national security and works in good faith towards that end. But obviously, this is not business as usual. Donald Trump has taken a wrecking ball to our foreign policy, treated our allies as adversaries and our adversaries as allies, threatening to invade some of those allies, and launched a trade war that is hurting our economy and our constituents. So I would love more than anything to have a good faith effort to reauthorize the State Department, and I would welcome discussions to that end. But you know what? The State Department officials came to brief staff earlier this week, but it was after their reorganization had been set into motion. Programs were cut, and after the firing notices were started going out. That's not consultation. That's, to me, insulting. And while I want to thank the chairman and my majority colleagues for arranging that belated briefing, Secretary Rubio's messengers could not even answer basic questions, like what offices should be closed, or how they arrived at a 15% domestic staffing reduction. So I think that there should be more consultations. Let me just ask you these questions. You can answer yes or no. Do you believe Congress must be meaningfully consulted on major state reorganization or changes to USAID, including ending the vast majority of congressionally appropriated foreign assistance? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And another yes or no. Do you believe that sweeping changes like this, especially on items mandated in law, should it be done by an executive order, or should you have to come to Congress?
There are legal issues here, Congressman, that I am not competent to get into, but again, I'll go with my first answer. When appropriate and when it's under law, Congress must be consulted.
Mr. Hale?
Yes, if you want a sustainable, decision, I think it requires legislation and consultation with Congress.
I believe it absolutely requires consultation with Congress and a clear-cut connection between the ends and the means, which I am not seeing in this plan.
And also, on top of all that, Secretary Rubio's cuts already underway, and the White House is reportedly readying a rescission of more than $9 billion from the state and foreign operations budget. Would the practical impact of these cuts on our ability to advance U.S. interests globally be significant, or would they be detrimental?
I'd have to see what the specifics are, Congressman.
I agree with Jim's answer. I'd want to see the details. I do believe that an organization the size of the State Department could definitely use some serious reform.
I come out differently on this based on what I've seen so far in press reporting, a 50% cut in state's operational budget, combined with the 80% plus cut in foreign assistance from USAID. I think this has devastating consequences with respect to our own security and prosperity and our ability to project leadership. I would just note that the PRC is already filling that gap.
That's my
and
next
we are
question.
seeing China increase its diplomatic spending. I've seen by over 8% for 2025, over 6% last year. And so again, to what end are we retreating from the field when our greatest geopolitical challenger is doubling down?
Okay. Now, I want just indulge the chairman just to have an answer with the two of you about that what was just mentioned about our ability to compete with China, significant or detrimental?
I'll draw on an article in The Economist from March. And The Economist, as I think you all know, is a very internationalist, globalist, engagement-oriented platform. The death of foreign aid. It says that 3/4 of all foreign aid is in development, economic, political assistance, and it basically says there is very little evidence that this produces any results, and goes on to say the idea that aid buys soft power is unconvincing too. Now, anything in print can be challenged, but I would have to say my own experience on the ground, beyond humanitarian assistance, which is critical, beyond security assistance, equally critical, all of the things we're doing to try to change societies, whether to compete with the Chinese or push back on the Russians, I haven't seen a whole lot of success, and I've been responsible for some of the largest ones, Congressman.
Thank you.
I'll just draw one chapter of my experience in Pakistan as ambassador there. I inherited, the Kerry-Lugar-Berman aid pipeline, which, frankly, in hindsight, I think, was an experiment that proved to not have really succeeded in achieving foreign policy goals. There are some good things that were done with it, but for the most part, the Pakistanis didn't want the assistance. They blocked a lot of it, and I don't think that if you had a objective measurement that it really changed either the growth of violent extremism in that part of the world or the cooperation of the Pakistani authorities to U.S. policy. In contrast, the Chinese were spending $50 to $60 billion in Belt and Road Initiative programs in Pakistan at the same time. They got a lot of credit for it. But over time, it turned out, as people discovered, these were not grants like ours. They were loans. And the business plans didn't make any sense. There's a lot of favoritism and corruption in it. And now they have a debt overhang that they can't deal with. So the Chinese approach also soured. So I'm not sure that I want to, while not ignoring the fact that resources matter, that the amount of money we're spending versus what the Chinese are spending in any given country maybe a starting point for a conversation. I don't know that it necessarily reflects an outcome of the way to measure exactly the best way the United States can influence behavior, because aid does not change policies. It can enable a partner who already is in agreement with us to do the things we want. But dangling aid isn't going to make somebody do things that they don't otherwise feel is in their national interest. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those
could-
answers. We now
Could I,
recognize,
is there time to, oh, sorry, okay.
now recognize Representative Wilson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and indeed, thank each of you for being here today. And Ambassador Jeffrey, we are grateful for your successful service as Special Representative for Syria with the first Trump administration, where you led efforts to enforce the Caesar Act to hold terrorist sponsor and butcher Assad, war criminal Putin, and Iran accountable. Ambassador, you were ultimately successful of the providing the assistance with Turkey and Saudi Arabia. In December, Bashar Assad abdicated and fled to Moscow. In November, a badge of honor I received is I was condemned by the Assad regime as an enemy of the state, which I recognize I was, and now he's gone. Last week, I appreciate that Congressman Corey Mills and Morland Stutzman visited Damascus as Syria reachieves independence. There is such opportunity for the people of Syria to restore freedom. The UK last week lifted sanctions. With that in mind, what do you think American policy should be to assist the people of Syria?
I gather that you're looking at me, Congressman.
Yes.
First of all, it was the Syrian people who overthrew Assad. What we had was effective policy done by several administrations with the full support of Congress, working together with partners and allies that enabled the Syrian people to take that step. So I think it's a good example of what we're all trying to strive for today. I think we need to, as this administration is doing and as the Biden administration in its last days did, reach out slowly and carefully to the new government and take steps as the new government responds to our and other partners' legitimate security concerns. I think it's on a good path, Congressman, but time will tell.
Well, again, it was your efforts that I think helped make this successful, so thank you so much. And indeed, Secretary Ambassador Hale, allies purchasing American defense products are experiencing undue delays in delivery for products that they've already paid for. For example, Taiwan had bought so much capability to defend themselves, but for years it's been held up. And then going through the foreign military sales process, in some cases the delays have been so significant that allies and partners are forced to look elsewhere. Thankfully, Congressman and Chairman Mike McCaul and now Chairman Brian Mast are champions for reform, assisted by Ranking Member Greg Meeks. And Secretary, what changes do you believe should be made to streamline the process?
I wouldn't assert that I have any great authority or ideas on that. I support the idea of streamlining it. Certainly, I share your concern about the delays that we've witnessed over time. I had to deal with this myself in Lebanon when I was ambassador there. They were dealing with a tremendous ISIS threat, and we wanted to rapidly provide assistance to the Lebanese authorities, and we were able to do that. It took a lot of hard work by an embassy, frankly, our defense attaché, myself, and the teams back here, so it can be done. But if you have ways in which you think we are able to streamline this while making sure that, of course, the money is not diverted into areas that are inappropriate or corrupt, by all means, we should do that. Once we know we have a policy, it shouldn't be hard to figure out what we're going to do after that.
Well, hey, I want to thank you. You indicated ambassadorships in Islamabad and Beirut. My goodness, you really are selected for interesting places. But on a positive note, there has been change in Lebanon too, and so what can we do to work together, hopefully in the spirit of Syria, with Lebanon?
Well, I was also ambassador in Jordan, so that was the garden spot for me. But yeah, on Lebanon, we have an opportunity that is rare in life. There is change underway. No one would have dreamt a year and a half ago that we would be able to deal with what we're dealing with here. The worst thing we could do is abandon the Lebanese to themselves. they still need help. The central government is very weak. The moderates there, their families and people have been assassinated by Hezbollah over time. It's hard for them. So we need to keep the pressure on Iran. That's our role. Our role is not to tinker with the Lebanese reforms and steps. We should encourage that and help nurture it. But what America can do is make sure that whatever else we're doing with Iran, we continue to hold them accountable for the support of Hezbollah and make sure that they know that we demand the disarmament of Hezbollah.
And indeed, the Trump administration, its maximum pressure on the head of the snake, the octopus, and Tehran should be on notice that for the people of Iran, we're for them. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. We now recognize Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm actually really glad we're convening this hearing today. I'll be honest, when I worked at the State Department, I was incredibly frustrated with the longtime career diplomats who were very resistant to change. And I think that mentality has contributed to the department's ineffectiveness over the years. I think reform is absolutely needed in the State Department. In fact, I passed bipartisan legislation to help address risk aversion and the bunker mentality at our embassies, and other reforms to how we do security assistance, how we do foreign assistance. So that's why I am so disappointed that this reorganization effort has become a partisan exercise marred by chaos and without regard to the law. Between the leaked proposal we've seen to slash the department's budget in half, the commitments to cut staff by 15%, despite the department now having to take on what is left of USAID programming, and reports that the department will significantly downsize its diplomatic presence abroad, taken together, I actually don't think these reforms will lead to a more effective State Department, which is what we really want. The reality is, we do need to think more strategically about what our national security priorities and interests are in a multipolar world. But Chairman Mast, I just fundamentally disagree with you that human rights and our values aren't part of that, because I think our power is derived from our ability to build international coalitions. And to do that, we need to address our values and build our coalitions around that. So first, I want to focus on an area of ongoing reform that I think we can learn from. Chairman Emeritus McCaul and I, my good friend, introduced our reauthorization for the Global Fragility Act. This focuses on important reforms for how we get to align policy and programs, more robust monitoring and evaluation. But Secretary Rubio's reorganization proposal would shut down the Conflict and Stabilization Operations Bureau, which I actually worked at, which is leading the implementation. And look, we can have a separate debate on the best way to house the kind of conflict expertise in the department. We led a GAO review of CSO under the Biden administration. But Secretary Zaya, as Undersecretary of J, you oversaw the work of CSO and the Global Fragility Act. Can you discuss the importance of maintaining the Global Fragility Act team, led by an assistant secretary as required by law, to actually implement GFA and meet its statutory obligations?
Thank you, Representative Jacobs, and thanks to you and Representative McCaul for your bipartisan leadership in the Global Fragility Act. This is exactly the kind of state modernization that I think we should rally bipartisan support for. And I saw this firsthand in my role as Undersecretary visiting GFA partner countries, Mozambique, Cote d'Ivoire, as well as Haiti. And what I saw on the ground was a shift away from open-ended assistance commitments, where implementation is defined as spending money, and really focusing on measuring results, evidence-based approaches, and course corrections. And it is very sad to me that this effort is now being potentially extinguished just 2 years in when it's starting to bear fruit. It's about integrating State Department efforts with our colleagues at DoD, with USAID, but also with international partners who have followed our lead, particularly in coastal West Africa, where we have 4 embassies working together in an integrated way I have never seen. But you've got the international financial institutions, the EU, and the Brits coming in behind to focus on the same areas. And I do want to make a point about human rights and security and hard security. Representative Wilson mentioned his visit to Syria. I was a human rights officer in Syria under Hafiz al-Assad. At this point, our support for pluralism, for inclusion of women in Syria's transitional government and process, that is absolutely a guarantor of security. And Syria is a diverse country of many faiths. We cannot allow it to fall into a majoritarian system that oppresses so many of Syria's people after the immense suffering they've had. That's also why accountability is so important, so we can finally achieve accountability for the Assad regime's horrific crimes.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think one of the really innovative reforms in the Global Fragility Act is being able to assess the effectiveness of U.S. policy in a single country across all of our activities done by all different agencies. And I know that sounds simple, but actually GFA is the only capability we've ever had to assess whether or not our policy, whole of government in a country, is actually achieving its goals. So I do hope that Secretary Rubio will maintain that function. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Jacobs. We now recognize Representative Smith from New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for calling this important hearing, and welcome to our very distinguished panel. I am the prime author of the Bipartisan Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and among some of its provisions, there are dozens of mutually reinforcing provisions. We established a tier system, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 3 for the most egregious violators not doing anything or complicit in human trafficking within their country in the areas of prevention, prosecution, and protection. I've been very concerned, and I've held dozens of hearings over the years with both administrations, all administrations, and we keep getting from the tip office, ambassador at large, and from people in the tip office how there's almost like a hand-to-hand combat when certain nations are put on tier 3, and many of our bureau chiefs, especially the assistant secretaries for the region, argue and don't do it. There are other equities that we need to be concerned about, and my argument has always been, get it right. What you do on the sanctions piece, which is prescribed in the law as well, prescribed, I should say, is purely up to the administration. But getting it right on the facts, it should be non-negotiable. And yet the most egregious example there was during the Obama administration when Reuters broke the story that there were more than a dozen nations that got artificially inflated grades because of other issues. So I had 2 hearings on that. And said, don't do that. You sell out the victims. Now, I am concerned that we get the integrity right on the process, and ditto for the International Religious Freedom Act, so that, call it the way it is. What we do on the sanctions piece, is something that the Secretary of State and the President can negotiate. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are now as we're going through this whole revamping. And Secretary Rubio, I do believe, is very strongly committed to both religious freedom and to trafficking issues. How do we ensure the integrity of the process, getting it right? Those bureaus need to be as independent as possible, in my opinion. The tip office is made up of wonderful people who work overtime, and each embassy, as you know, Mr. Ambassador, tender all of the data back as to what's going on in that individual country. How do we ensure that those, and there are other offices as well, but religious freedom and trafficking in persons, how do we ensure the integrity of that process? Yes, please.
Thanks so much, Representative Smith. I would say from my own experience, I have seen how the TVPA affects change on the ground in the tier ranking system. And I would say in my role as Undersecretary, I enjoyed very close collaboration with my counterpart, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, and colleagues from regional bureaus in really focusing on the countries that we were seeing a degradation in conditions, but also recognizing opportunities for progress. I want to highlight 2. Together, the Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons, working with civil society and the private sector, worked tirelessly to successfully eradicate child and forced labor from the cotton industry in Uzbekistan. That might sound like an issue far away in a land that doesn't matter to Americans. It does matter to the U.S. cotton industry, who cannot compete against forced labor-produced products. This is why I am so concerned about subsuming this office, which really enjoys unrivaled global leadership on this mission to end human slavery, into the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. The legal definition of human trafficking does not require movement across international borders. So I am quite worried that that is a downgrade that will really undercut efforts to end exploitation of some of the most vulnerable people at a moment where we're really making progress. I've also seen in the case of allies like the Republic of Korea, a downgrade to Tier 2 really produced a tremendous amount of effort and engagement where we saw improvements where they were able to move back up to Tier 1. So the ranking system, I think, has had a very positive effect, although many didn't like it when it came out, in affecting change.
If I may briefly add to this, I was ambassador to Albania, and boy, this was one of my top priorities. I haven't been too kind to soft power in my statement and some of my comments here today, but this is an example that I think for the committee to look at where soft power can work. Because first of all, it reflects values that across the board Americans believe in, because this is terrible stuff. Secondly, it is something that is concrete that you can get governments to stop without changing their whole outlook to the universe, their philosophy, their religious background, and everything else. Much of what we do is broad. You've got to look like Denmark, or you've got to look like, Washington, D.C. This is very specific. We monitor it closely, and you bet I was always trying to get Albania raised one level higher, and you can bet I was beaten down because we had concrete standards to go by. That's what the Secretary should continue to enforce because it represents the will of not only the Congress, but the American people.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Representative Castro.
Thanks, Chairman. I've served on this committee for, well, since I got into Congress in January of 2013, and have always supported a comprehensive authorization of the State Department. Doing so is a core responsibility of this committee and is our best opportunity to strengthen American leadership and diplomacy. And this committee has, in recent years, been successful in passing and enacting authorizing legislation to do just this. I've had the opportunity to contribute meaningful legislation now enacted to strengthen the State Department, USAID, and the Foreign Service. In drafting this legislation, though, there's always a balance that we strike. The language must be specific enough to set direction of the department, but flexible enough for our diplomats and foreign assistance professionals to implement the laws in an ever-changing international landscape. This has, for decades, been a careful balance built on trust and good faith between each Congress and each administration. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has abused this relationship and dynamic. The Congress has, for decades, authorized specific programs and agencies. USAID, the Inter-American Foundation, the U.S. African Development Foundation, the United States Institute of Peace, the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Bipartisan laws have established each of these agencies and their programs. Laws continue to direct funding for these agencies and their programs. In each of these cases, the administration has directed the agencies to reduce operations to, quote, minimum required by statute, essentially closing the agencies down. They have abused the flexibility afforded by the law to essentially terminate these programs. An authorization to do something without a requirement that it specifically be done is being interpreted as permission to ignore congressional intent and refuse to undertake the activity. In the current environment, if the Congress wants a law to be enacted, it seems the language must be very specific and bind the hands of our diplomats so that they have no flexibility. So I wanted to ask Ambassadors Jeffrey and Hale, how effective do you think our diplomats would be if the laws provide the department little to no flexibility because the Congress cannot trust the President of the United States to faithfully execute the laws of the United States?
The Secretary of State and his or her subordinates need a considerable amount of flexibility to carry out the intent of Congress. I don't want to get into what is, in the middle of a very partisan and hot debate. What I would say is it's very important that Congress not just authorize an activity or an agency, but state what the goals are in general terms. We can then operate in terms of what the military calls troops to task to figure out how to do that, what the procedures are, what kind of people we need. But general guidance in some detail is always good to know which direction you're going. And again, the trafficking in people, it was very clear that Congress wanted us to put an end to this. And we've done a pretty good job.
Ambassador?
Yeah, no, I would agree very much. And I would also, underscore state the obvious, that, the world changes. Foreign policy needs to be nimble and adroit and able to respond to emerging problems that we didn't anticipate. Maybe we should have, maybe we shouldn't have, but we didn't. And we need to be able to have a consultation with you all here on the Hill about those emerging and changing threats and opportunities as well, and make sure that we have the flexibility we need, but also we're connected to you. And it's not just a matter of when you have your confirmation hearing or when you're called up for a very formal event, but the ongoing consultations with members and staff.
Sure. Well, USAID, the Inter-American Foundation, the U.S. African Development Foundation, the United States Institute of Peace, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation have all been established by law and have existing valid authorizations. Yet the administration has moved to eliminate all of these entities. It has abused and exploited the difference between the spirit, or the gap between the spirit and the letter of the law. And so far, this committee and this Congress have allowed the president and the administration to do that. Perhaps, we'll see in the coming years, but forever resetting the balance of power and control between the executive branch and the president and this Congress. That is going on in real time right now. This committee and this Congress are surrendering influence and control over our diplomacy to the President of the United States. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Castro. Representative Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very important hearing. And far from ceding Congress's authority to the executive branch, this entire exercise is about Congress reclaiming its important role in authorizing and reauthorizing the State Department. Thank you to our ambassadors for your service. I just returned from a bipartisan Codel from our embassy in Tokyo. I thanked our incredible Foreign Service personnel there in that spectacular embassy there and thanked them for their service. And I think our Foreign Service personnel who are forward deployed in embassies and missions across the globe and who do a great job representing our country and our values overseas, they deserve a reauthorized State Department that reforms in some cases the department, that in some cases economizes the department, rethinks and reimagines and modernizes the department, strengthens and in some cases refocuses the department. I think our Foreign Service personnel and our diplomats deserve that. And that's what this entire opportunity presents. I'd like to take my time to clear the air on some negative press that this administration has received for this much-needed reorganization of the State Department. Critics have argued that cuts and reviews undermine American soft power and damage alliances with our allies, but our own Secretary of State and other senior officials have said that's not true. Secretary of State Rubio recently stated, "We're going to be involved in those things, caring about human rights, but it's going to be run at the embassy and regional level, not out of some office in Washington, D.C." Speaking on the America First trade agenda, Secretary Besant said, "America First does not mean America alone. To the contrary, it's a call for deeper collaboration and mutual respect among trade partners." Tammy Bruce, spokesperson for the State Department on reorganizing U.S. aid, said that don't mistake a change for indicating that something is gone. It was never about us abandoning our commitment to funding of any kind, but it's going to look different, and now it will. It will actually be going to be within a functional framework. Secretary Rubio said about diplomacy in the Middle East, this is not a president that's looking to start wars. He's a president that's looking to stop the Houthis and prevent them. That's why we've been focused on Ukraine, and that's why we're having talks with Iranians. We're committed to achieving a peaceful outcome that's acceptable to everyone. We want to achieve a peaceful resolution and not resort to anything else. Ambassador Jeffrey, do you see the need for consolidation and more streamlined processes at the State Department and more focus? And how could it be actually beneficial to advancing American foreign policy?
Yes, I do. I think, first of all, it's important that whatever this or any administration does, it reflects a general thrust of policy that we can be sure the next administration, regardless of Republican or Democratic, will follow. When we deal with countries and they say yes to something we're asking, they're making an investment, just like people do in the stock market, and they're investing in an assumption that there'll be returns on this. It's somewhat transactional, and thus predictability and consistency are important. So anything that streamlines the organization and makes it more efficient will help. Again, the devil is in the details on what you throw overboard, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to continue. Again, focus on the operating elements of the Department of State. Those are the geographic bureaus. Those are the people who, even though they're only assistant secretaries, they spend much more time with the Secretary of State than most other people in the building, and they're his or her operating arms. They're very important to empower.
Well, I do think that refocusing and reorganizing really could enhance morale among our diplomats and give them additional mission and purpose. One final question about China. In this new era of great power competition, where should the State Department focus its efforts with respect to competition with the PRC? And should we think seriously about some of our diplomatic efforts that actually push would-be partners into the arms of China, like our the previous administration's efforts to push against a domestic law in Uganda that actually encouraged China to build a Belt and Road project there?
Well, I was involved when I was undersecretary in a major reorganization effort to confront the problem that we faced in China, because the organization, while the Washington consensus, as they say, had shifted and recognized the problem, the bureaucracy had not. And so we took the positions that were liberated out of Baghdad, Basra, and Kabul as circumstances changed there, and assigned them to the China team. A lot of people wanted them to be sent to China, and I was one of those arguing, and successfully so, against too much of that. Instead, we needed those resources and those people, which are our main resource at the State Department, to be on the front lines where we were dealing with the invidious Chinese influence, and that included international organizations, as well as different countries in the world, and you mentioned one of them. And so we did I think, a pretty impressive exercise in gathering data to understand exactly what the nature of the Chinese threat was in every country in the world, both business, security, public diplomacy, all the different categories of influence, and decide where were the countries where, frankly, it was too far gone, that resources were wasted there. Where were the countries where there was still competition, and where was the competition needed? And then to make sure that our country teams in each of those places had the resources and the strategy to deal with it, because how you deal with China and Thailand is going to be different than how you deal with it in El Salvador. And then to proselytize with our people to make sure they understood that whatever you were doing before, now China was at the top of your list. And I think we made great inroads.
Well, I have great respect for our diplomats, and that's exactly why I support this reauthorization process to continue to strengthen the department. I yield back.
I now recognize Representative Titus.
Thank you. Well, while we're hearing about devastating cuts that are coming from the other side of the aisle, I'd like to talk about maybe some productive ways that we could enhance the mission through the State Department. One of those, I believe, is establishing a diplomatic reserve corps. That's an initiative that I believe would make the State Department more agile and better able to respond to crises around the world and more quickly. And I'm going to be introducing a bill that establishes such a corps. Ambassador Jeffrey, you've been a career ambassador in Iraq and Turkey. You mentioned Albania. You've been a deputy national security advisor. Would you speak to the advantages of having such a reserve corps?
I think they're extraordinary. I've seen how it works with the military. It's what kept us afloat in several conflicts, rotating people in and out. It also gives the Secretary flexibility without having to expand dramatically the personnel and the costs of the department, because as you can see, that's not appreciated by everybody here or in the country as a whole. A reserve corps would be much cheaper and in some respects more flexible, because these are people who are ready to go on an instant's notice. In many cases, we've tried variants of this on an experimental basis before, and I think it proved its worth. So I would strongly support that because there will be surges. We're going to be involved in the kind of thing we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Sooner or later, one way or the other, we have been through the history of the Foreign Service and the U.S. government.
Doing well by doing good, or vice versa, would Meeks said. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear you say that, and I hope my colleagues will pay attention to that it meets some of their goals of being more efficient and also serving the mission. The second question is that if you look at Senator Rubio's comments during his confirmation hearing, he said, preventing crises is a lot cheaper and a lot better than dealing with crises after the fact. Now, I happen to agree with that, but when I look at the State Department reorganization, I see that the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations has disappeared. I don't see it on the new organization chart. Looks like it's going to sunset according to the fact sheet. I think this bureau is very important. It plays a role in atrocities prevention, implementation of the Global Fragility Act, conflict mapping and analysis, support for peace negotiations. But it's gone. I mean, where is it gone? Are these technical capacities going to exist elsewhere in the State Department? Would you address that, Ms. Zaya?
Thank you. Absolutely. The Bureau of Conflict Stabilization Operations has evolved into really the premier player supporting high-stakes diplomatic negotiations, including the achievement of a cessation of hostilities agreement in Ethiopia that ended the devastating conflict in Tigray. But they've also helped our efforts to stand up and a temporary political authority in Haiti. They've supported diplomatic efforts on Sudan, and as we've discussed, they are the government lead on the Global Fragility Act, a bipartisan effort to really pursue evidence-based, locally led approaches to better prevent and end conflict sustainably. So, you know, from an oversight perspective, I think there are a lot of questions as to what consolidation means, and there's a real imperative to ensure the United States does not lose this tremendous reserve of expertise that is making a difference in an effort to slash and consolidate. And on the overall point of consolidation, I want to say that the world is so complex that you simply cannot concentrate it in the hands of 6 regional undersecretaries. The functional bureaus of the Department of State are absolutely operational and strategic. One of the ones that I oversaw, the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, stood up a coalition of more than 160 countries to fight the scourge of illicit synthetic drugs and fentanyl. So this is really a moment for all players on the field, not to take out our team members in a short-sighted effort to streamline that undercuts our interests.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Representative Jackson from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Appreciate your time. For over 20 years, Congress has failed to properly reauthorize the State Department, which has allowed the federal bureaucracy to circumvent congressional oversight. If Biden's State Department proved anything to us, it's that these bloated agencies must be kept in check, or federal bureaucrats will act on their own whims, independent of the needs of the American people. Thankfully, President Trump and Secretary Rubio have already taken decisive action to restructure the Department of State to better align with our foreign policy objectives and put citizens of the United States first. Both sides of the aisle have argued that foreign service performance evaluation and promotion processes lack objectivity and transparency. The issue is largely due to the previous administration's obsession with DEI, where former Secretary of State Blinken released a 5-year diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility strategic plan to, quote, ensure that the Department of State is a leader in the government-wide efforts to advance DEIA goals for federal workforce. Fortunately, President Trump and Secretary Rubio are working to ensure that all Foreign Service recruitment, hiring, promotion, and retention decisions are based on the individual's merit and merit alone. Ambassador Hale, what can this committee do to ensure that Foreign Service personnel education and promotion processes are based on merit even after the Trump administration is completed?
Well, I think this is a core concern. We're a meritocracy. The Foreign Service is largely based on, staffing is largely based on a Foreign Service exam that is competitive. And we are pledged to the concept of up or out. In my experience, however, in my career, there was a lot of up, but there wasn't much out. And my data may be undoubtedly is old, but when I was in office, the data generally was about 0.5 to 1.5% of the Foreign Service each year was separated for, basically for non-performance. I suspect that there were probably more people than that who were not meeting the standards that objectively would be required. But part of the problem was that the promotion process produces a list where the bottom third or the lower performing staff. But then the next number you come into is how many positions do we have to fill? So the cut goes deeper than the cutoff mark for people who are really not performing by any objective standards. So we retain people who frankly really aren't capable, which is where streamlining can become very important. So you not only look at the people, but also look at positions and make sure that positions we have are really things we need to be doing. I personally don't get all that caught up in the reorganization charts. I'm not saying they're not important, but what is important is filling those boxes with people who can do the job. I mean, A, filling them, which we've seen as a problem in some administrations, and then B, making sure, as I said at the beginning, that they actually have the skill set needed and are held accountable to their performance, and that they understand the mindset of the Foreign Service should be that we are not policymakers. We are there to provide our expertise and knowledge and advice. Decision makers are other people, and when decisions are made, that we salute smartly and implement those policies rather than, but they also has to make sure that we have a climate inside the Foreign Service and the Civil Service that enables dissent and creativity, which is going to produce the best policies we can have.
I agree with you on that. And I also think that recruitment and retention are going to be important as well, obviously. And I think that a merit-based system will help with the recruitment and retention and fill some of those boxes you were talking about. I have one more question real quick in my remaining time here. Consular officers play a vital role in our national defense, adjudicating who receives a visa to come to the United States and who is denied entry. Ambassador Jeffrey, given the important role of the Consular Affairs Office in maintaining the security of our borders, is there any merit to moving the consular visa adjudication function from the State Department to the Department of Homeland Security? And if not, why not?
As I indicated in my remarks, I would support that because the policy is determined by Homeland Security, not the State Department. Secondly, we have more people from other agencies at a typical embassy than we do people from the State Department. So just because there would be more DH people and a few less State Department visa offices, that would not be a major change in how embassies work or deal with. But the third thing is, and it gets to the question you posed to David, one reason that we're having a hard time evaluating on merit Foreign Service officers is that we don't know what their core skill is. The Marine Corps is well aware of what it is, every Marine a rifleman. Ours should be every Foreign Service officer a diplomat. But over the years, the accumulation of administrative functions has led to us thinking our people are managers. Now, management is fine. I've got a master's in business administration, but the core skill is diplomacy. And the visa function, unlike taking care of Americans abroad, which is a core consular diplomatic function, the visa function is a managerial function. It almost never involves dealing with the host government. We keep the host governments out of it, just like they keep, we don't have any say as a government in Germany or other countries letting, Americans travel there. So I think that it would be cleaner and it would streamline how we look at ourselves if that function were to go.
Thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate your input, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Dean for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Chairwoman, and I thank Ranking Member Meeks for organizing this hearing today. And I thank you, ambassadors and secretary, for your years of service and, of course, for your expertise that you're offering us today. As we review what has been a very chaotic time, lots of people are confused. And I have to admit, whether I'm speaking to folks from USAID here in the United States or abroad, or I'm speaking to folks from State Department here or abroad, having just come back from Denmark, Ukraine, Jordan, Israel with Ranking Member Meeks, folks are confused. And I want to lift up the people who have worked for USAID, many of them dismissed with zero notice, not even able to take their own belongings, their own personal photos of their work, dismissed with such utter disregard. And now what is going on with the Department of State. I want to lift up the people who have worked in the Department of State. I am utterly impressed to a person with their dedication to diplomacy, to service to this country, and the same for USAID. So, unfortunately, since his return to office in January, President Trump has chosen to attempt to overpower foreign partners rather than engage in strategic diplomacy. His administration claims their policies will bring safety, security, and prosperity, many of the points that you brought up, Madam Secretary, to America. But all that I've seen thus far is a reeling economy, weakened relationships with our allies, and emboldened adversaries. The cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy and approach to foreign aid has always been the 3D approach: defense, diplomacy, development. Unfortunately, we have seen a Secretary of Defense, for example, who repeatedly compromises national security to no account. Shuttering of USAID under this administration, an agency that saves millions of lives and builds goodwill for America, builds our own national security. And now this drastic set of proposals and rapid changes to the State Department, which, as you said, Madam Secretary, will hobble diplomatic strength and create a void that our adversaries are obviously taking a close look at and probably enjoying. Like USAID, as I said, State Department is filled with some of the most knowledgeable in foreign affairs, national security, and humanitarian work. It honors expertise and takes years to cultivate. And yet Secretary Rubio, and it's baffling to me, does not advocate for the very department he's tasked to lead. I don't understand that. Proposing further personnel and budget cuts that will exacerbate and damage, and DOGE has already done great damage. Maybe I'll start with you, Madam Secretary. You pointed out so succinctly the 3 points in your testimony and in your written testimony as well. Do you think that what we're seeing here with the cuts to the State Department has followed a critical analysis of where we could be streamlining, where we do have duplication of efforts, where we have talented people that we need to make sure stay there or grow there? Have we gone through that process, and did I just miss it?
Thank you, Representative Dean. I have seen no sign of such a process or even a strategy. And I do so appreciate your words commending the sacrifices and the commitment of former USAID colleagues as well as former state colleagues. I just want to share 2 quick stories about USAID's impact and who they are up against. I was in Kyiv last October, where USAID literally is keeping the lights and the heat on. The night before my arrival, 150 drones rained down on Kyiv. They were Iranian provided, part of this axis, including Iran, the DPRK, China also supporting Russia's continued illegal aggression against Ukraine. They tried unsuccessfully to destroy Ukraine's electric infrastructure, and it was USAID experts working in partnership with the Ukrainian government who were able to literally keep the population from freezing to death. That's one sign of their impact. A second is on I mentioned fentanyl and counter-narcotics efforts that are, fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 49. People may not realize that USAID, working in partnership with the State Department, is literally clawing back rural territories formerly under the control of Clan del Golfo. And it isn't one siloed approach. It isn't just security. It is security and development. And it is human-centered security that meets the needs of the population and does not leave them to be preyed upon by the narcos and some of the world's worst criminal organizations.
I thank you very much, because that is a passion of mine. Opioid addiction has touched my family. I have a son in recovery, 12 years in recovery, and the fentanyl crisis that is stealing, at this point, 87,000 lives a year is something that we must pay attention to. And I have to admit, the president has talked about caring about fentanyl. So why would we just disregard where we are making progress? With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Self for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, this is an opportunity to get the State Department right, I hope. And I will tell you, I'm going to start with a quote from Clausewitz. War is a mere continuation of policy by other means. I am convinced that we call it great power competition. I'm not sure that's what it is. I think we're in a hybrid war now. You may remember just a couple of days ago in Spain, Portugal, and southern part of France, there was an outage. Siemens Security now says that it was a cyber attack. It was on the SCADA equipment, and it caused cascading failure across 2 countries and part of another. I want to pick up on something that Chairman Emeritus McCaul said, because in your written statement, Ambassador Jeffrey, you talked about the DoD combatant commands need to be aligned with the bureaus. I am of the opinion, and I'd like your opinion, of State Department and DoD need to work together in the national interest of the United States across the world, because policy in the State Department simply is acting in our national interest and eventually to preclude war between great powers. So I think that this committee ought to inform the NDAA, because we ought to have a coordinated national policy for where we are going as a nation, which would include the backup of hard power to any soft power that we exercise around the world. China is certainly on the march, and they're making moves toward Taiwan. I just returned from Europe, and one of the points we were making to our European allies is when they build infrastructure, such as pipelines, they need to be coordinated with the war plans that General Cavoli is putting in place in NATO and turning NATO into a legitimate war-fighting organization. Yesterday, I held a hearing in the Europe Subcommittee on the cyberspace and digital policy branch of State Department. So I would ask you, Ambassador, for your thoughts on this, and particularly the digital policy here, because it is a part of the hybrid war that we are in now.
Thank you, Congressman, and thanks for the Clausewitz quote. It's one of my favorites. Our flag officers are responsible for the other means. That's their business. Our job is the continuation, that plug in between policy and what the military is doing in the field, the things they blow up, the things, territory they hold, territory they seize. And I found the military is very willing to listen to diplomats in the State Department. But the procedures, be it on the digital account, be it on emerging technologies, be it on new threats, the channels have to be clear-cut. It's very hard to have 2 battle buddies, and most of our combatant commanders and most of our assistant secretaries are in that situation, and it undercuts the immediate understanding, the sort of mind meld that you get in the field. For example, when I was in Iraq and later in Syria, I had a 3- or 4-star military counterpart, and only one, and those officers only had one, it was me, and it worked very, very well. So I do think that that's important. In terms of the new threats, again, we bring the civilian side which is often very important on these emerging military technologies, again, cyber, digital, all of that stuff, we can bring that to the table and we can reinforce what the military is doing.
Very good. So for the two ambassadors, where would you put cyberspace and digital policy?
You
Start
mean
with you,
organizationally in the State
Organizationally,
Department?
where would you put it?
I think it's really hard, actually. You can have pros and cons for any of the conceivable ideas that I've seen. There was a movement to put it under P, where I served. I didn't think that was a particularly wise idea, partly because I knew I didn't have the skill set, frankly, as undersecretary to really grapple with the cyber threat. It was beyond my experience zone. So I think the first thing, not to skip your answer, I'll come back to it, but the first thing is to make sure we actually have people who can handle it, you know, who have the background. We are diplomats, as Jim said, first and foremost, but we also have to have the technical competence to deal with the subject matter at hand. And I don't believe we've been training people to deal with the cyber threat. I would put it in the T family if forced to make a decision, because again, I think you're more likely to get the kind of people who have the frame of mind to deal with it. It's global in nature, of course, and so that's where I would put it. And I know time is of the essence, but I would just reinforce, in my experience, the coordination between the Foreign Service and embassies and combatant commanders has been superb, and it works far better in the field than DoD-state relationships do back here. Not that they're bad, but overseas, I think because we're all on the front lines of whatever we're dealing with, the cooperation and communication is really outstanding.
Very quickly, Ambassador, do you have an idea on CDP organizationally?
Yes, I would agree with David. It should be one of the global bureaus or offices, probably T, but the key thing is those are the kind of global things I like because they provide technical expertise. It's a worldwide problem. It spreads beyond any regional bureau, and they provide support to us like the counterterrorism people do. They don't try to do our job for us or take it away from us or compete with us, and that's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Self. Representative Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my 13th year on this committee, and, why I've always enjoyed the Foreign Affairs Committee in the past, under the guidance of Elliot Engel and Ed Royce, is, we'll have heated debate, but when we're out there abroad, we're representing the United States of America, and I think we're all proud as Democrats and Republicans of who we are as Americans and what we've accomplished. When I'm out there, I do travel a lot, both on this committee as well as on the Intelligence Committee. And I see our brave men and women out there, Foreign Service officers, aid and development folks in conflict zones and refugee camps. And I have the utmost respect for them, as I do for our men and women in military uniform as well, and what they do to both provide the goodwill abroad as the people of the United States, but also to protect our services. So to the three of you, thank you for your service. If I look at the accomplishments of the United States, I'm incredibly proud of what we did post-World War II in creating a world order that created relative peace and prosperity for 75 years, ending the Cold War without actually going to war with the Soviet Union. Many of you were there on the front lines. And that was the military and our diplomatic corps working together. It wasn't Democratic or Republican. We've had, throughout that time, Democratic and Republican administrations. We had a Congress, but we didn't go one way or the other. So I don't think, Mr. Chairman, you'll find a lot of resistance to doing a State Department Authorization Act. But what I would urge is, let's do this in a bipartisan way. We can't make this a Republican authorization bill or a Democratic authorization bill. Look, we're in the minority. I won't say let's meet at the 50-yard line. We'll go to your 40-yard line. But if you take us to the 10-yard line, to your end zone, we're not going to be able to do this. And the challenge there is there's going to be a day when the Democrats are back in the majority. I hope that's in 2026, Chairman Meeks. And if we do this together, then we can actually have something enduring. We're not going to get it all right, but we can get it, mostly right. So we're not constantly every 2-4 years going back and forth. That doesn't serve our interests well. That doesn't serve the world's interest well, because this is a different world. We're in the 21st century now. We've got to do this together. We've got to think about this. I would not go about a reorganization the way President Trump is, but it is what it is. It's creating an opportunity for us to build something better that's more reflective of today's world, to where we have programs that no longer make sense, great. But that doesn't mean we should retreat from the world. We should take the best minds, folks like all three of you who have been on the front lines, use your expertise, tell us how we could do this better, what worked, what doesn't work. But we should do it in this committee as Democrats and Republicans working together, so in 2 years, if we have the gavels, we're not undoing everything and starting from scratch. Let's do something that's lasting, that gets better each time. Let's reaffirm who we are as the Foreign Affairs Committee. Chairman McCaul talked about what we do. Yeah, we pass authorization bills, but we always attach it to the NDAA. There's so much that we should have jurisdiction over as the Foreign Affairs Committee that goes into the Pentagon budget. That's not to knock the NDAA, but the NDAA is going to be $1 trillion bill. We don't have to spend more money. We just have to take some of what's in that $1 trillion NDAA, pull it back into our budget, pull it back into where it belongs in a State Department authorization bill. I'm willing to work together if we do this in a bipartisan way. We can keep the divisive stuff out of this. We're going to need a State Department. We're going to need aid and development. When I got time to spend with my good friend Joe Wilson, every time he says war criminal Putin, it makes me feel really good. But the real work's going to be, I hope President Trump's successful in finding a ceasefire that is good for the Ukrainian people. But we're going to have to do a lot of work diplomatically to then make sure there's an enduring peace. What is rebuilding Ukraine going to look like? When Joe Wilson talks about the butcher Assad, the Syrian people have a real opportunity here, but it is going to take diplomats. It is going to take Democrats, Republicans, a strong diplomatic development corps to give them the best chance at success and peace. So again, I'm not going to ask you questions. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all those foreign service officers, but there's a real opportunity in this disruption. It's not how I would do it, but if we work together as Democrats and Republicans, meet at the 40-yard line, we're going to like some things, we're not going to like some things, but we do this together in this committee, I think we can have a lasting State Department.
Thank you, Representative Barr. And I'll just comment on your comments as well to say, this State Department reauthorization, from building this process in the committee from the ground up, has been about really looking at where this process has been done at this pedantic drumbeat, looking at armed services and saying, how did they get that accomplished every single, Congress? How did they get that done? And make it an expectations that there's not appropriations for armed services without the authorization of armed services going on. Certainly if they can do it with a budget 10 times the size of what our budget is, then we should certainly have the ability to do that with the scope of that for what we have to deal with in terms of programming there. Every member, Republican, Democrat, will have that opportunity to submit their ideas, to a portal for this, to say, this is what I want in a reauthorization. This is what I want to prioritize and deprioritize. And so 100% member-driven process, and the process to build out doing this, what is our focus in doing this, has been to literally hire on staff from armed services because they have that muscle memory of doing that NDAA year after year after year, that we want to say, hey, we need to create that muscle memory of doing that here on foreign affairs year after year after year, Congress after Congress. So your point has reflected on now and has been reflected on in the past. So I thank you for your comments. Representative Kim, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, and I also want to thank Ranking Member Meeks for holding today's hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. As it's been stated, in 20 years, we have opportunity to, work on reauthorizing the State Department. So as my colleague and ranking member on the subcommittee that we both serve on, I agree with him that we need to work together and find a bipartisan reforms that will continue to strengthen our U.S. leadership on the world stage, and also make sure that U.S. is remaining the partner of choice, in the world stage with our allies and partners who depend on our leadership. The State Department over time has struggled to find its purpose, and its most important authorities and functions have been absorbed by other agencies. This is especially true when it comes to the economic statecraft. In 2012, President Obama proposed the consolidation of 6 agencies, including USTR, Commerce, and others, to bring coherence to our economic statecraft portfolio, but that effort failed to materialize. So I want to ask you, Mr. Hale, is bringing USTR back into the Department of State as it was before 1961, is that a good idea? Why or why not?
I definitely believe that there is a need for greater integration and coordination of our international economic policies and resources and agencies. I'm not wedded to any specific proposal on doing that. You would be a better judge of me of the reality that there are important domestic political factors in play here that that would have to be weighed. I would certainly believe that I understand why a president wants to have a cabinet-ranked member of his team dealing with trade, but I've witnessed firsthand where the separation of the agencies has not allowed us to do the best job possible. And USTR in particular suffers, if I may say so. They're very capable people, but it's a very small agency, and the bandwidth is such. I can only imagine how they're dealing with the amount of attention being focused on tariff and trade policies right now. So I would encourage not just thinking about what our embassies can do to better integrate, but how the State Department can incorporate some of these. And third, there's been a lot of tinkering with the National Economic Council and having like a NSC equivalent to deal with national economic and international strategies. I haven't seen it really work the way the NSC works, where it's a really functioning, demand-driven organization where the president's leadership is clearly understood by everyone involved. That could be improved.
Thank you. In 1979, the Foreign Commercial Service and Foreign Agriculture Service were pulled out of the State Department, weakening our ability to advocate for American business overseas. So, Mr. Jeffries, should FCS and FAS be brought back into the department?
Absolutely, Congresswoman. One of the core jobs of any embassy team led by the ambassador is to promote American business, not just big ticket items such as military sales, commercial aircraft, energy projects, although those are always at the top of the agenda, but any kind of American business, American farming initiative in a country not only should, but usually does get the support of the ambassador and his or her team. Thus, they should be under the...
I appreciate that perspective. In 1999, I want to talk about the U.S. AGM. U.S. Information Agency was dissolved and its component parts pushed into the department and created Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy. And so international broadcasting elements like Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty, and Voice of America, they were all merged into Broadcasting Board of Governors, and BBG and its successor organization, the U.S. AGM, that we're talking about today, were notoriously dysfunctional and desperately needed reform. That is a widely accepted as fact. So should these organizations be put under the State Department's umbrella or be reconstituted as federal grantees? Mr. Hale, can you answer that?
Well, in my mind, they're foreign policy tools, so they're best led by the foreign policy agency, the premier agency, which is the State Department. I would also, though, question, in my background in the Middle East, the big question was the introduction after 9/11 of the Middle East broadcasting enterprise. And I thought it was built on a false premise in that Radio Free Europe, Voice of America was fundamental during the Cold War in filling a vacuum because the Soviet Union wasn't allowing any other news sources to come in. We were able to do that. That's not the problem in the Middle East. There are news sources there. We can get an American official or American voices on any platform we want. It's a question of content. So I wouldn't be spending money on building platforms to try to compete with Al Arabiya or Al Jazeera. I would be thinking about how we can use our talent to make our case on those and other platforms.
So talking about content, very briefly, Chairman, if USAGM is not replaced with some new organization, are we ceding the information space to our adversaries because content-wise, we're not winning the information war?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I experienced this as Undersecretary and talking all around the world with our ambassadors about what they needed. And we had plenty of PD resources in the Middle East and South Asia. We didn't in Europe. And China was eating our lunch, so to speak. And so, yes, but content, not necessarily replicating platforms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kim. Representative Olszewski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Chairman Mast, and the Ranking Member Meeks for convening this hearing. Thank you to all of our witnesses. I appreciate my colleagues' flexibility, this committee's flexibility as I bounce between here and a markup today. I also want to just say I really much look forward to engaging with Secretary Rubio. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your help in facilitating that in the weeks ahead. As I've said many times before, this administration has the right, maybe even the obligation, to explore reforms and to ensure policies that align with its foreign policy goals. However, I do question some of the administration's recent actions in advancement of these objectives. I want to thank my friend and colleague, Representative Kim, for leading an amazing bipartisan trip to the East Pacific recently, where I had the opportunity to see firsthand how many of our allies are losing confidence in America's commitment as this administration guts critical foreign aid funding and diplomatic programs. Our partners are confused and they are concerned about why the U.S. is voluntarily ceding influence to the region, to China. Why can't we be stronger? We are being asked often, and we know that we can't be stronger if we're isolated. I will continue to beat the drum with my colleagues on the importance of showing up and standing with our allies. What also concerns me is a lack of clarity from the State Department on how it plans to administer development assistance. We know that humanitarian programs are critical to strengthening stability in developing countries, but as the first Trump administration's own Journey to Self-Reliance framework recognized, lasting stability requires also addressing root causes, including weak governance, infrastructure gaps, and economic exclusion. Discarding the very long-term development tools needed to prevent recurring crises and creating durable markets for U.S. goods is short-sighted, in my opinion. It fails to provide countries with the support they need to transition off of U.S. assistance, a goal I think we all share. That being said, without development programs, partner countries will be unable to take on the kinds of projects that the DFC aims to finance alongside the U.S. private sector. Countries cannot simply transition from receiving humanitarian assistance to absorbing large-scale private sector investments. There must be a middle phase that builds capacity, provides technical assistance, and grows economies. I'll start with you, Undersecretary Zaya. Can you talk a little bit about why development assistance is such an integral part of U.S. foreign assistance, and how can we use state authorization to protect programs that drive long-term sustainable growth around the world?
Thank you, Congressman. I absolutely agree with you that we cannot neglect that middle phase and make the choice of just security and humanitarian assistance. What is development assistance? It is addressing the root causes of instability, which can threaten our own national security and prosperity. It is supporting health systems that have put us on the cusp of eliminating HIV/AIDS as a global scourge, and all of those gains are at risk of loss given some of the chaotic cuts that have been executed. But it's also about accountable governance, responsive governance. If you look at the migration challenge in this hemisphere, the toxic governance in Venezuela and Nicaragua and Cuba has resulted in unprecedented out-migration. We simply cannot afford to not care about the human rights situations in our own hemisphere and elsewhere. And look at who is cheering the removal of USAID from the field. Our biggest adversaries, Tehran, Beijing, Moscow. That should tell you something about the impact of these efforts, and that this is not something to simply discard entirely because of objections to a handful of particular programs.
Thank you for that. And with my remaining time, a question for everyone about the human impacts of this reorganization. Reports are suggesting a 15% reduction in U.S.-based State Department personnel and the near total elimination of USAID. In about 20,000 jobs total, we're talking about real Americans, real impact, real work. This question, again, is for everyone. Does the State Department have the expertise and staff to take on these USAID foreign assistance functions, programming, implementation, and oversight? In what areas would the State Department need to staff up in order to handle that transition appropriately? And without adequate staff, will that impact the accountability in light of that first question?
I mean, the quick answer is no across the board. And whether it's disaster response, where I think we saw a disastrous outcome with respect to the earthquake in Burma, where, our team on the ground was fired and leaving a vacuum for the PRC and others to come in. With respect to famine response, I mean, it's very important to recognize the decades of technical expertise and operational leadership, which is very different from a lot of the assistance managed out of Washington that teams in the PRM Bureau and PEPFAR have done a phenomenal job. But it doesn't add up to terminate the people with that expertise with no hope or no clear path to be reintegrated into a new entity.
To my mind, the concept of integrating AID into the State Department, which, as was mentioned, goes all the way back, frankly. I was working for Madeleine Albright when she tried to do that in the mid-1990s. Isn't so much that you're going to find people who are current Foreign Service officers at the State Department who are suddenly going to be able to do U.S. aid workers' work. By the way, much of which is done by contractors, not by direct hire. It's that you need to do perhaps a better job than we've done to make sure that our foreign policies and aid policies are actually fully integrated, which overseas works reasonably well. In Washington, it doesn't work well at all. And you can cast blame to lots of different directions. I wouldn't blame people. I don't believe in demonizing anyone. I worked well with my aid colleagues and have tremendous respect for them. But that, to me, is what aid should be about. To answer your question, of course, as that happens, is an office director for a certain geographical part of the world going to automatically be able to be a manager for the aid programs as well? Of course not. We need to integrate these processes, not substitute them.
Thank you very much. I yield, Mr. Chair.
Representative Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for being here today. Agriculture is important to me, and it's important to our country. And we make a contribution from agriculture to USAID around the world, and had the opportunity to go to Florida or to Africa a couple of times. So I'm just setting the stage for my question here in a minute. Sometimes those commodities end up being in the hands of adversaries, used as, it's fungible, it's used as money instead of really ended up. So my point is this statistic from the USAID is only 12.7% of that funding actually ends up in the hands of the people we intended it for. And so that's the question. So now when you look at international organizations, the State Department contributes more than $8 billion annually to international organizations. And if we cannot audit that or make sure that it's going to the appropriate recipients, then I'm concerned about it. So my question comes down to, going forward, what do you think, with all of your experience, the actions should be from Congress in order to allow the government to have oversight mechanisms that are appropriate to assess the relevant information to ensure compliance from these different NGOs? So I want to know what we can do to make sure that those commodities or whatever we're providing through USAID is really getting to the people who need it. Because I understand the concern about PRC, but I'm not sure that we're being effective as we should be with our USAID.
If I might jump in, Congressman, I would say this is why it's so critical to resource that oversight. And the dismissal of inspectors general at multiple agencies, including USAID, I think that was a setback. But certainly we have to make absolutely sure that all of that taxpayer-funded assistance is reaching its intended recipient. I think the 12% was with respect to local partners who are, the first recipient of this U.S. large S. But, I think you're absolutely right, but we have to, in this challenge funding environment, still have the manpower, the people who can ensure the money is well spent. And I think individual agencies have layers of support for that, but the 15% cut across the board in the department, it's going to be a difficult choice, I think, on the domestic side, where those cuts are going to come out.
I would just say that in my experience, most recently with Syria, the USAID watched closely on diversion and who it was going to, and that's to be applauded. That is absolutely necessary, and whatever the organization is, it is important that those functions, under whatever hat, and the people who know how to do that continue to carry out those functions. In terms of aid to international organizations, as the famous case of UNRWA in Gaza in particular, that's troubling. That's a special case, and it's something for Congress, and I think the State Department to take a closer look at.
Well, sure, I agree. I think that it's beholden on all of us to make sure that there's accountability and that the money's not wasted, goes to the recipients. I think there's also a deeper question, which is, can we do a better job in measuring actually the impact that we're having? I mean, we have all of these sometimes grandiose objectives about our foreign assistance, which no one's going to disagree with. But is the way we're doing aid actually achieving those goals? And what is the process of measuring that? Who's measuring it? And what in my experience in government is that we end up measuring the things we can measure because that's easier. So you measure how many young women in southern Lebanon have been trained in English, when that is supposed to be a means to an objective of transforming a society to make sure that there's 100%, not 50% of the population is employable, and that they have access to things that make them more moderately inclined and more economically competitive. We don't measure that. We measure how many girls are going through an English program, which I'm all in favor of. The point is, we lose perspective because we lose sight of the objective that we have. And I can remember, I won't name the country because it'll be embarrassing. In one of my countries, I had an aid director come to me and she said, it's 50 years of a US aid program in this country. We want to have a celebration. Next year, we're going to celebrate. And I said, no, we're not. I love the aid program. We're doing good stuff there. The country needs it. But we're not going to celebrate the fact that we have a forever aid program somewhere. And that's because we're not measuring the outcomes or the results in any meaningful way. So in the authorization process, you can help us do that. Wonderful.
I thank you. My time is run out, and so I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Baird. Representative Alma.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. None of the public hearings this committee has held on reauthorizing the State Department, including today's, have had a witness who is a current employee of the State Department. By comparison, at this point, last Congress, we heard from 7 current State Department officials, including the Secretary of State. So I look forward to seeing Secretary Rubio in this hearing room soon. This committee does not appear serious at this point about a thoughtful reauthorization process. If so, we would invite and have present current state leaders to be part of the public record so everybody can participate in the discussion. Instead, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem content to once again rubber stamp President Trump and Secretary Rubio's half-baked plan to eliminate programs that save lives. Let's highlight some of these harms. Ms. Zaya, could you provide one-word answers to the following questions? Would eliminating the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons help or hurt our anti-trafficking efforts?
Hurt.
Would it help or hurt our ability to rescue victims of human trafficking?
Hurt.
Would it help or hurt our ability to identify and prosecute human traffickers?
Hurt.
Turning now to the Office of Global Women's Issues, the branch focused on women and girls in peace and security processes. Would Secretary Rubio's elimination plan help or hurt women gaining leadership roles around the world?
Hurt.
Secretary Rubio proposed gutting the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, which works to prevent conflicts that increase the risk of terrorism, trafficking, and smuggling. Would eliminating this bureau help or hurt our national security?
Hurt.
Would it help or hurt our ability to combat terrorist acts?
Hurt.
Lastly, this Bureau funds work to document human rights abuses, war crimes, and other atrocities. Would eliminating this Bureau hurt or help our ability to prevent human rights violations?
Hurt.
So it is critical here. I know we just ran through that exercise, but there are clear decisions, clear contrasts. This plan puts us on the wrong side of those. Now, on this continued frustration that I have around humanitarian aid, I refuse to be silent amid the unlawful effort to shut down USAID. And let me underscore unlawful. The reorganization plan completely eliminates USAID and calls for regional bureaus, the State Department, as we've talked about, to take over the development programming in their region. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, USAID had been working on improving education to promote economic growth and political stability in the region. Ms. Zayek, you can take your time with this one. I don't need one word, but does the State Department have the expertise and staff necessary to effectively implement formally USAID development programs like these education programs in sub-Saharan Africa, and how does eliminating USAID harm our global development efforts?
Congressman, the short answer is no. It does not have the expertise and the resources, but I would also make the point that it simply does not add up to take on such responsibilities at the same time you are making an unjustified, unexplained 15% to the domestic staff. And we've talked a lot about the Foreign Service, which I was a member of proudly for 3 decades plus, but there is a civil service in the department, over 10,000 strong, where there is a reserve of tremendous regional subject matter expertise, but you simply cannot assign these responsibilities. And I make the point about overseas presence because there has been a strong USAID presence overseas, both Americans and locally employed staff members who themselves are incredibly capable, dedicated employees of the United States who have really specialized in areas where you simply cannot assign that to a Foreign Service officer or GS-13 and expect to have success, by the way, while you're cutting the hide out of those offices or eliminating over 130 offices at the same time.
Look, my time is wrapping up, but I want to conclude with this. This reauthorization provides us with a great opportunity, and I'm grateful that there is bipartisan agreement that we can use this moment to advance our interests, but not as we shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to the expertise, the talent, the capacities that we have to make American interests meet the moment with our values across the world. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Amo. And I would remind you, it would be unconventional to have unconfirmed appointees come and testify before us. Additionally, I don't know if you were present, but Mr. Morocco did come and speak to us, testify before us as well. And Secretary Rubio is scheduled to come sometime later in May. I don't know the exact date right offhand. And I would just take the opportunity to thank Secretary Rubio for what is his commitment to the American people, which is to say very plainly that any dollar that goes out the door, whether to an American, a foreign company, a foreign NGO, a foreign nonprofit, a foreign adversary, a foreign enemy, or anybody else, will meet the justification that it's better spent going abroad than staying in the pocket of an American. That is his standard, that he should be able to look somebody in the eye and say, the dollar that came out of your pocket is better spent going to the Taliban or to some other continent or some non-government organization or somewhere else than staying in your pocket. That is the barrier, the threshold that he wishes to meet, and I applaud him on that. And I recognize Representative McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. It's been 13 years since we last passed a State Department reauthorization. Since then, we've seen the organization go totally overboard in promoting radical ideologies worldwide and executing our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which I take very personally. President Trump and Secretary Rubio are reforging a State Department that champions American interests and responsibility of stewards taxpayers' dollars. Soon it will be our job to codify that, to make it permanent. I think when we talk about responsibilities and shifting responsibilities inside of our departments, Mr. Jeffrey, I wanted to ask you, there have been discussions about making the Department of Homeland Security responsible for overseas visa operations instead of the state. This is a critical matter, especially in my constituency, which is about 14% Indian diaspora, about 40% minorities, many who have family who come in and out of the United States. I just want to make sure that when we ensure the Department of Homeland Security takes over, that they are prepared to do so without any problems in the transition. Do you think that's possible?
I can't get into the details of who they would have. As a basic principle, however, they own the policies. They work with Congress to develop our overall immigration policy. The Immigration and Naturalization Act is under their purview, and thus I think they should have people in the field who are doing that, just like other agencies have people in the field. A critical rationale for that, Congressman, is that this usually doesn't involve high-level country-to-country discussions, because every country treats who comes in and out of its country as its own business. And, for example, you may be issuing visas in Ecuador. The Ecuadorian government isn't going to be calling you all of the time to protest what you're doing or not doing. So you don't have the same level of diplomatic involvement. That is usually the litmus test for me of whether the State Department and an embassy should manage that through the State Department officers there, or whether we should have other people out there.
So in other words, we'll be able to execute this without losing any abilities or time, but just make it a little bit safer for the American people?
And the devil is always in the details on any administrative change. They always bring with them turmoil in the short run. In the long run, the question is it a more rational way of applying our resources and our focus? That's a function that isn't central to protecting the American people in terms of threats from abroad. Well, actually it is, I'm sorry, but it is a very important mission, but it is one, again, that's technical in nature and that follows very specific laws, again, that DHS, not the State Department, puts out.
Okay, great. Mr. Hale, $1 million question for you. Based on your experience, what specific changes can we make to the State Department through this reauthorization bill that would have the biggest positive impact on our national security and diplomacy? I know that's a big question, but if you can hone it down to what is the one big bite we can take out of this that would make us better?
Insist that the Foreign Service actually goes back to basics. Whatever organizational chart you look at, is going to reflect certain transitory values, but the Foreign Service has to do its basic core function of diplomacy. And so as you write this authorization bill, I would ask you again, as I said at the beginning, to be persistent and not just, once you've written a bill, you're done. It's also about the continued engagement to make sure the Foreign Service actually has the training and the skills and the leadership needed to fulfill whatever mandates you've given through the authorization process. And I would say the biggest, to get really to your question, to me the biggest gap right now that I see when you look down the horizon that we're not ready for is the growing importance of science and technology in the work of diplomacy. We're never going to be scientists, we're never going to be that person, but we have to have much greater fluency in the substance of science writ large. I'm talking about everything from cyber to pandemics than is the case today.
As a member of cyber on HASC, as a member of science, space, technology, and as a member of foreign affairs, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for that summary. We didn't even coordinate. With that, I yield, Mr.
Thank you, Representative McCormick. Representative Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Our goal as a committee should be to make sure the State Department is efficient and effective in driving U.S. foreign policy. And I'd hope to have a frank, serious, and informed conversation here today about where we should be doubling down on our strategic investments and where we could do away with bureaucratic bloat. But then last week, Secretary Rubio unilaterally announced a drastic reorganization of the State Department without any input from the United States Congress. It's part of a troubling pattern of this administration sidelining or completely going around the co-equal legislative branch and the people we represent. While there's no question that American foreign policy has made serious mistakes over the decades, in nearly every case, those failures were made worse because administrations hid the truth from Congress, or they rushed decisions before the American people could weigh in. For all the Trump administration's talk about avoiding the foreign policy failures of the past, it's charging full speed into that same pattern. On the anniversary of the fall of Saigon, we should be learning from some of America's most painful foreign policy disasters, not repeating conditions that caused them. This reorganization is just the latest blow to the tools of American soft power, diplomacy, development, humanitarian leadership that have helped counter threats from Russia, Iran, and China for decades, that have boosted the Arizona economy by attracting foreign tourists, industry giants, and the best and brightest foreign students, that have reduced the flow of fentanyl by coordinating law enforcement across countries, that have helped reduce migration by helping people stay in their home countries instead of overwhelming our southern border even beyond what's already happening. No global challenge lends itself to quick or easy solutions, but each of them demand principled, consistent American leadership. Right now, the most dangerous lie we can indulge is that if we disentangle ourselves from the global economy and our humanitarian commitments and withdraw from our strategic alliances, that will somehow return America to greatness. It won't. America's interests are global, Arizona's interests are global, and our security and prosperity depend on the strength of our alliances. Ms. Zaya, why is engagement with Congress important, not just from a constitutional perspective, but from a practical one?
Well, I think as one of my panelists mentioned earlier, it keeps the work of the State Department grounded with the will of the American people, but it also, that consultative process, what Secretary Blinken often called, being present at the takeoff, not just the landing with respect to policies, I think it produces better outcomes. And when you look at, U.S. humanitarian and human rights policy and the through line, the continuity, it's built upon one bipartisan initiative after the other, whether it's the U.S. Refugee Act of 1980 or the Global Magnitsky Act of 2016. And we've talked about the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the International Religious Freedom Act. I seriously doubt that the Department of State, which I served proudly for most of my adult life, would have come up with those initiatives on its own without the leadership and the direction from the U.S. Congress.
Follow-up question, do cuts of the kind proposed by Secretary Rubio signal an understanding of what is required to effectively compete with China, Russia, Iran, and other adversaries?
I don't see that strategy in what has been presented so far. And, I'll give you a small example. In addition to being an undersecretary, I was the U.S. Special Coordinator for Tibetan issues. Now, this is a role in which we've had decades of bipartisan support. It is supporting preservation of the unique religious, cultural, linguistic traditions of the Tibetan people, but it's also about preventing a certain PRC effort to co-opt the succession of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Tibet is considered a core issue for the CCP. It is a focus of attention where the repression has taken on the enormity of over 1 million children in government forced re-education, so-called boarding schools. The future of that position is completely unclear on that org chart. We were a small office. We were able to rally greater international support, devote attention to an issue that is coming to the fore with the Dalai Lama turning 90 this year. If we walk away from roles like this, it is literally a free giveaway to the CCP.
That's a very powerful answer. I ran out of time, so with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Morland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for holding this hearing today and for your efforts to reauthorize the State Department. Long overdue task, and despite Secretary Rubio's excellent leadership, the State Department is in desperate need of reauthorization. between budgetary constraints and overlapping objectives, the department clearly needs Congress to undertake this belated process. Guam is at the forefront of many defense-related conversations, but it's important to recognize our role in other sectors of international relations. I want to commend the Guam Visitors Bureau and the Guam Economic Development Authority for serving as part of America's face in the Pacific. While these local agencies work tirelessly to promote positive international relations, I'm glad these committees seek to reauthorize the State Department because there are many areas of U.S. diplomacy to improve. One of the problems we must address is the reform of foreign assistance programs. This February, the committee explored options to enhance the role of U.S. assistance in USAID. The conclusion was obvious: cut the wasteful funds and keep the strategic valuable parts. As we contend with China, reauthorizing the Office of Foreign Assistance, Global Partnership, and the Development Finance Corporation is imperative to enhance U.S. soft power. Similarly, the reauthorization will strengthen U.S. foreign policy from an economic perspective. During an East Asian and Pacific Subcommittee roundtable, it became evident that the State Department is undermanned in the economic sphere. Without a doubt, developing relationships with other countries through economic tools can make the U.S. presence in the region more visible and effective. This also fosters mutual beneficial relations while creating opportunities for the U.S. private sector, allowing Americans to feel the positive effects of our diplomatic efforts. Ambassador Hale, considering China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, how do you evaluate the current move by the administration to scale back these programs and the workforce? Based on your experience as a career ambassador, what would be the most effective framework to plan, implement, and access foreign assistance programs under the Secretary of State?
Well, we definitely need to make sure that we have the resources and manpower needed in order to deal with the Chinese, our competitive relationship with China across the globe. No question about that. I would say, though, as I said earlier, that we also need to measure the impact not by the amount spent, but by the results that we have achieved, and then fine-tune whatever it is that we're doing. Our methodology is very different than the Chinese methodology, and to try to compete on the same terms that they do, they have a state-directed economy, so they can send whatever resources they want all around the world. No one's going to say no. The United States is a private sector economy, of course, so no one at the State Department can sit and tell Bechtel where to spend their money. We need to help them, enable them, make sure that there's a level playing field, that the Chinese aren't eating everything up. But that's a little bit different. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that dollar for dollar is the way to measure it. And we also have a, Parkinson's law, the bureaucratic principle that work expands the number of people you assign to do it, right? So what is it we want to do is the starting point, not how many people are we going to get to do it. And so I would argue, I'll give you an example out of my career. When I was director for Israeli-Palestinian affairs, we had a certain pretty big office. I went overseas. I came back 5 years later as the next rung up in the bureaucracy, Deputy Assistant Secretary. My enterprising successor had doubled the size of the office of the Israeli-Palestinian affairs in 5 years. The work hadn't changed. Our interests hadn't changed. Our programs hadn't changed. They were all busy people doing busy things. Did we need it? Who is there making the judgment? What are the results? And so I would ask us to always bear that in mind.
Thank you. Ambassador Jeffrey, we just have a few seconds here. As I previously mentioned, an East Asia Pacific Subcommittee roundtable determined the economic offices at the Department of State have been undermanned based on your career at both State Department and National Security Council. Do you agree on this conclusion? What economics tools would you like to see fixed and reauthorized?
In terms of the economic side of the State Department, I'm not so sure we have too few offices. I think that they need to be better integrated into what other parts of the U.S. government who have interests abroad, from the Department of Agriculture, USTR we talked about earlier, that's something that needs to be worked on more. That can be through training, that can be through assignments in other agencies, which we try to do, but it's very hard in the bureaucracy.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sorry, we ran out of time.
Pardon?
We ran out of time.
Okay.
But I thank you for your comments. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank each one of you for your participation. To Zaya, I'd have a question regarding our critical health programs such as PEPFAR that has been demonstrably extremely successful, has saved millions of lives. This network has saved millions. It has provided a strong health system that protects Americans domestically and abroad by detecting and responding to health threats before they can spread as a core American value. But in recent months, we've seen concerning decisions that have undercut America's global strength and put people at risk, whether through staffing shortages, funding delays, or unclear directions amid the evolving State Department reorganization. I've gone to several countries most recently, and one of the pains that I have to hear is that there's food in the bins, there is HIV medicines, there's malaria vaccinations. We have employees that are stuck abroad. They cannot return home, American citizens, and they cannot distribute the food. Given this overwhelming success of these programs and their vital role in our global strategy, how do we ensure that the integrity, effectiveness, and bipartisan support are not only preserved but strengthened?
Thank you, Congressman. I think you've explained well, what some of the chaotic impacts have been of the decisions we've seen since January. And I would just add on this point that these health programs are not a giveaway. This is all about the well-being and the security of Americans. If we learned anything from 2019, it is that pandemics know no borders, and the impact can be absolutely devastating from an economic and a personal perspective. So again, with PEPFAR on the cusp of, by 2030, eliminating HIV/AIDS as a global scourge, to pull the rug out from life-saving antiretroviral programs, but also, it's come up a few times today with respect to the inherent dignity of all human beings, including LGBTQI plus persons. The delivery of these life-saving programs to these communities is absolutely critical in our public health approach, but it isn't just HIV/AIDS. It's Mpox, it's malaria, it's Ebola, which I was part of an effort under the Obama administration that helped contain the spread of Ebola in West Africa through a multi-country US-led effort. So all I can say is that I hope they take a hard look at the impacts thus far. They consult with the partners whose own operations have been decimated by this lurching effort, but also with the communities that have benefited from this for years, and try to turn it around.
Thank you. One other question I would have for you. DEIA and fellowship programs. I was startled to see a group of students in my office one morning that had their scholarships cut from their foreign service careers, and they were primarily African American and Hispanic students. Very specifically, at one point in my life, I served on a Fulbright program and a scholars program. And so it's just very clear that Black students have been cut out, eliminated from careers that have been introduced into foreign service. What have you seen to be the value of such fellowship programs, particularly targeting and being inclusive to bring in minority students? The Fulbright has not been touched. That primarily has a lot of Caucasian students. But the Payne and the Rangel scholarships that have been outstanding African American members, those scholarships have been targeted and cut. Can you please elaborate? Is this consistent with our values?
Thank you for raising this. These fellowships, which include the Pickering, Rangel, the Payne fellowships, they have long been the subject of deep-rooted bipartisan support. And I just want to say, these are not DEIA fellowships. These are not quotas. They're all about merit, but they're also about casting the net more widely so that more bright students from across the country, in terms of geographic representation, in terms of different backgrounds, have the opportunity to consider, and also the financial support to be able to pursue their education at the undergrad and graduate level and contribute to the department. And over more than 2 decades, I've seen some incredible diplomats come through that program. I was frankly shocked by the cutoff and the impact not only on the students involved, but on our department, as this has, I think, been a proven magnet for great talent and excellent diplomats.
Well, Zaya, I thank you so much for your contribution, your continued support, and under the Students for Fair Admissions Act law that was adhered to by the United States Supreme Court, diversity, equity, and inclusion is legal in the United States Armed Services. Someone in the administration needs to read the law. If it's good in the war room and if it's good at the United States military academies, it's good in the classrooms, it's good in the workrooms. So we need to make sure we enforce the law. There's nothing wrong about having diversity, e pluribus unum, out of many we're one. There's nothing wrong with having equality, the 14th Amendment. There's nothing wrong with having inclusivity and accessibility so people that have different abilities that may need a wheelchair ramp or other things can have access and have inclusion. I thank you for your years of service and continued success. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman, for this important hearing today and frankly for the alignment with the objectives the administration's laid out, which is really basic, that America's resources should reflect America's interests. And when we use the State Department, it's been shocking as a member of Congress to get here and say my suspicions have matched reality, that a lot of times our nation's diplomats are working at odds with the people that sent me here to represent them. And then when Congress has weighed in, they've evaded every kind of accountability. So the mission alignment of agencies and bureaus at state are consistently out of line with what they should be doing. So the correction that Secretary of State Rubio and frankly Chairman Mast are trying to accomplish here are long overdue. We authorize our Defense Department year in and year out via the NDAA. The idea that it's not possible for the State Department to be authorized ever, if not consistently, is absurd. The Constitution only authorizes the government to use the powers delegated to it in law, and unauthorized programs goes against the spirit of our nation and our Constitution. So I look forward to the State Department authorization process because the mission of the department is too important to be left to career, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats that simply ride out administration after administration and pursue their own agenda. Mr. Hale, in recent weeks, we've seen proposals circulating from the Rubio State Department outlining a total overhaul of the organizational chart that outlines missions and authorizes our Foreign Service Corps. One move that I applaud and I'm looking to codify in upcoming legislation is to move the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement from the Democracy and Human Rights branch to the International Security branch of the State Department. It makes so much sense to me, and every year thousands of Americans, often tens of thousands of Americans every single year lose their lives to the fentanyl crisis. Foreign gang activity, transnational criminal organizations are killing American citizens, and countering this is part of the goal of INL. In 2023, a GAO report concluded that, quote, INL's efforts to implement assistance to Mexico had been hampered by incomplete performance management efforts, end quote, and went on to list issues with corruption, ineffective programming, and numerous systematic issues within democracy and human rights management. So moving this org chart, to me, makes sense. What say you?
No, I agree. I think it's a very successful bureau by and large. I think it's a very valuable way to be functioning and to put our investments into that activity. And in my experience, at least in the countries I served in, the partners of INL are primarily in the security arena. So I think it's a much more natural fit.
Thank you for that. Mr. Jeffrey, in a 2025 press release, the State Department admitted to breaking the law by funding abortions in Mozambique with federal tax dollars. This violates the Helms Amendment. Despite openly breaking the law, there have been no serious consequences. The nonprofit or non-government organization funded by government dollars gave Becky a minimal sum of money, and nobody was ever held to account. At least 21 unborn babies were killed with the complicity of our United States State Department and our tax dollars. They can give back the money, but they can't bring back these lives. We know that it happened, so we must have consequences written into our law. That's why last month I introduced the Aid Accountability Act of 2025. My bill would permanently ban federal funding from organizations that break the law and violate the Helms Amendment. The bill would also disbar federal service workers who participate in this. Mr. Jeffrey, what steps can we take in Congress to ensure that civil servants and non-government organizations comply with the laws we write?
Well, civil servants are subject to the discipline of the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State has both criminal, that is law enforcement, and Inspector General, and administrative personnel tools that he or she can use to pursue anybody who has violated the law. And in my experience, I've seen this repeatedly used, again, for those people who violated the law. So I think that it's a question of letting the Secretary use those authorities that he has.
Thank you for that, and I hope Secretary Rubio does just that. Obviously, Secretary Blinken wanted it to happen. That's part of why it happened. So I thank Chairman Mast for this hearing today. We authorize DOD every year. It's time we do it for the State Department and make sure that Americans' resources advance America's interests first and foremost. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Davidson. Just to our witnesses, are you all good? You don't need we still have a number of representatives to ask questions. Are you all good? You don't need a restroom break or anything? Or? Good. Let me know if that changes. Happy to. Say it again, sir.
Roll on.
All right, very good. Don't hesitate to let me know if I know we've been going on for a while here. So we're going to go to Representative Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for your observations and sharing your insights today. And I also want to thank the many men and women serving our nation as diplomats, development workers, and in other critical duties around the world, oftentimes in harm's way, who have dedicated their careers advancing our national interests, protecting our national security. I want them to know that their service and contributions are both recognized and appreciated. I frequently say in this forum that American foreign policy is like a three-legged stool, resting on defense, diplomacy, and development. As former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis famously said, the less we are investing in diplomacy and development, the more we will have to spend on bullets for defense. I believe that the fundamental mission that we are talking about for the Department of State in that effort to protect our nation is to promote U.S. interests around the world and to help advance our national security. Do you all agree with that, disagree with that view? Do I nod for agree?
I agree, but having worked with Secretary, previously General Mattis in Fallujah and some other places, I would say what's important is the smart use of diplomacy.
Hold that thought, I agree. I think that's the key thing.
Not the volume or the amount,
Yes.
but whether it's smart and it plugs into everything else.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'll say, and maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but I would argue there's broad agreement on this committee, both Democrats and Republicans, that the State Department needs smart reform, and that many of the changes we're talking about are long past due. But reform has to support our national interests and protect our national security. Reform done the wrong way or for the wrong reasons, done impulsively or haphazardly or out of spite and personal vendetta, is more likely to put our interests at risk and diminish our national security posture. So my question for the whole panel, does anyone think that what is currently happening at State, including mass firings of career professionals with years of experience and expertise, and ending the vast majority of programs formerly under USAID, is strengthening U.S. global leadership or making the United States safer? Ambassador?
I think I'm not ready at this point to judge something that was already begun, but we haven't seen the end point. We don't know where Secretary Rubio will wind up on reductions of people, of money. He's going to come before this committee. I think you'll have an opportunity to press him on that question. But again, there's nothing wrong with cutting things. The Clinton administration eliminated almost half a million.
I agree. It's the smart. I mean, I focus on the smart.
Right,
Ambassador
so
Hale.
I'm going to fall back on my it's got to be smart excuse to
And thoughtful and
evade the
strategic.
question.
Ambassador Hale.
I strongly support reform and cutting. I think there's a lot that can be pruned back. I agree, obviously. I don't know who would disagree in this context anyway about it being done in an intelligent way and thoughtful way. I also share, though, there's a level of frustration, because we've all seen this over many decades, that when new teams come into a White House and want to change and reduce government, they get beaten back. They get swallowed by crises and bureaucratic resistance. So I don't share, I wouldn't go about it the way it's being done, but I understand a little bit the impulse to be dramatic.
But I think that's why it's so important for this committee, with our authority under Article 1, to take the initiative. Ambassador?
I agree.
I do not see how what's happened so far is advancing our national interest. I think how and what you cut is critical.
Right. So in my last minute, let me ask some rapid fire questions. But would countries like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea see the elimination or downgrade of the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor as a smart move to the advantage of the United States, or as a move benefiting their own national agendas? And just a yes or no answer.
Absolutely the latter.
Well, I don't see it being downgraded. I mean,
okay.
I don't think that's on the top list of things the Chinese are worried about us either doing or
Would they see
getting
it to
rid
their
of.
advantage? Because I asked the same question: would the same country see the elimination or downgrade of the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons as a smart move to the advantage of the United States, or as a move benefiting their own national agendas?
It benefits our adversaries.
Okay. Would Russia see the elimination or downgrade of U.S. programs that document war crimes and support civil societies in Eastern Europe as a smart move to the advantage of the United States, or a move benefiting their agendas? Ambassador Jeffries?
Again, that's not one of the things that will move the dial on Russia's reaction to us. It's
But
all
does
about
it benefit
hard power.
us or benefit them? Does it benefit us or benefit them to downgrade programs to document war crimes and support civil
I have
society?
a lot of problems with how we define war crimes and how that's used.
All right, and I'm over time, but I'll give the last two quick answers, yes or no.
I think we should be doing it, but I don't think it changes Russian behavior.
I think it does have an impact, and the Office of Global Criminal Justice has helped real-time accountability occur in Ukraine with convictions of Russians for war crimes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I look forward to working with you on this committee to try to find smart reform that moves us forward, that protects our interests, keeps Americans safe around the world and here at home. I yield back.
We will look forward to seeing your amendments, Mr. Schneider. Representative Bicks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, and I'm grateful to our witnesses for being here today. So as a member both of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, I recognize the undeniable intersection between our diplomatic efforts and our activities in the space domain. The United States stands at a pivotal moment where our leadership in space is linked to our economic vitality, our national security, as well as our scientific progress and our overall standing on the global stage. Given this reality, a central aspect of our reauthorization review must be the State Department's strategic role in shaping and implementing the U.S. foreign policy concerning the space arena. In this context, the expertise and insights residing outside of government represent an invaluable resource. Effectively harnessing these perspectives is not merely beneficial, it's essential for crafting forward-looking, space-related foreign policy. Therefore, I would like to direct my first question to Ambassador Jeffrey. What specific strategies does the State Department, particularly through the Office of Space Affairs, currently employ to integrate the perspectives of non-governmental actors into both the formulation and the execution of U.S. foreign policy within the space domain?
It's a great question, Congresswoman, but I would like to defer to Secretary Hale, who I think did more with space when he was Undersecretary than certainly I did working on Syria. Is that okay with you?
That's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, but I don't know that I did have much of anything to do with it. In my mind, it's one of those categories, though, of the emerging activities that backward-thinking, backward-looking organizational charts, authorization bills of the past, or the absence of them is an impediment to dealing with the new challenges. And so that's exactly why what we're talking about today is so valuable and so important, is to make sure we're actually resourced for the new threats. I don't know the answer to your question about how effective we are in integrating with NGOs. I would say it's, the State Department's never going to be the lead on space. So we're a supporting actor. So if I was in charge, I would say that our role should be to make sure that we are working with our other international partners to make sure our space policies are being effectively implemented and finding allies in that regard, and spotlighting the threats and challenges that obviously our competitors pose.
Thank you. Well, I'll go to a more general question then, and I'll be happy to have an answer from either of you. But what concrete steps can Congress and the State Department take to more effectively and proactively integrate non-governmental expertise directly into the Office of Space Affairs for Foreign Policy?
Having ducked your last question, I'll try to take that, and then Israel wants to do it too. We work at every level with NGOs. They're a major source of the thing we're always out there searching for, which is information. They're a major source of influence on our host governments. We have to be careful because we don't want to be interfering in internal affairs, although in many ways we do. But so I would say that there's a very healthy relationship. It's got some tension between U.S. embassies and the State Department and NGOs, both American and other countries, because they're major players on the international scene.
Thank you.
And Congresswoman, I would just thank you for highlighting the contributions and roles of non-governmental actors in international space policy. And we are facing, a global closure of civil society space that affects academic experts, universities as well. So I think the State Department maintaining those channels to non-governmental actors, recognizing this is absolutely 21st century diplomacy, is essential.
Thank you. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Biggs. Representative Johnson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that you are trying to follow in the footsteps of Ranking Member Meeks and reauthorize the State Department. But this process is not being done in a transparent or bipartisan way. An org chart alone does not tell us how offices will be staffed and how technical expertise will be retained, whether budget and resource allocations will reflect the mergings of offices and restructuring of foreign assistance, or whether the remaining offices will have the independence and authority to do a good work regardless of which politicians are in office. But Republicans have refused to hold even one hearing to date with Secretary Rubio to explain to the American people why they are dismantling vital agencies and programs. I understand from today that he hopefully will come to testify before this committee, and I hope, in fact, that that actually happens. The administration has already slashed our interagency regardless of congressional authorization or input, and reportedly plans to downsize our global presence by closing dozens of embassies and consulates. This reorganization would have a dramatic U.S. national security implications, constitutes an unjustified seismic shift in the U.S. foreign policy enterprise, and includes many proposed measures that would be illegal and without congressional action. Let me be clear, what is being proposed by Republicans in this administration would make us less safe and risk American lives. The State Department, USAID, and its diplomatic corps have been the backbone of American foreign policy, advancing U.S. interests, strengthening alliances, and responding to global crisis. Democrats have never shied away from conversations about improving the existing system, but slashing their workforces, closing embassies, consulates, and missions, and dismantling key bureaus is reckless and cripples our inability to conduct diplomacy, counter China and Russia, and maintain our way of life. The administration must engage with Congress, including testifying before us to explain and defend these plans to restructure the country's premier diplomatic agencies. Otherwise, this is not a serious or thoughtful process, and Democrats will not rubber stamp half-baked, dangerous challenges. You know, I'm very concerned about just the lack of stability. I believe one of you testified in response to another member's question, just the ongoing nature of administration to administration to administration. And I'm very concerned about what that does to the role of U.S. stability in the world is how people view us as a partner. And are we less stable? Are we less reliable? Can they not? Are we subject to such broad changing whims? And it makes us, I think, an unreliable partner. And it's very concerning to me. And also, I think this process of reorganization is appropriate. It's something we should absolutely do in a thoughtful, reasoned manner. But what's happened is the administration has taken a wrecking ball to our foreign policy, and then we're supposed to come back and take a look at it in the review mirror. And that's not how the process is designed to work. The process should be, we should have people come in and testify regarding various programs and let us determine, have they fulfilled their mission? Did they never achieve the intended purpose? Have they exceeded their authority, or whatever the case may be? And then this committee should be able to go through and decide and give directives. These are the programs that Congress chooses to fund. Rather than that, the administration has just obliterated them all, expecting this committee to rubber stamp it in full. So my question to you is, what would be the practical impact of a nearly 50% cut to the department's budget request by the administration on the State Department's programming and personnel? I think we're close on time, so Dr. Zia?
I would just repeat the point I made earlier, Congresswoman. It doesn't add up. And, you know, a 15% domestic staffing cut combined with a 50% operational cut, it's very hard for me to imagine how, you know, this conversation has been about meeting 21st century challenges, streamlining decision-making, yes, absolutely, to be able to be more agile, more impactful for the American people. There's a lot of explaining to do how this could possibly happen with, it isn't even attenuated. That is an unprecedented cut and chop to U.S. diplomatic operations. And we're talking about things like oversight, which are absolutely essential. How do you do that all with far fewer salaries paid and operations in place when our adversaries are in maximum overdrive?
Right. Thank you. I'm out of time. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. I know it was before your time. You're a new member here, but there has been extensive opportunity to debate the merits of programs, and unfortunately, we've had person after person from the previous administration come here, literally lie to Republicans and Democrats to our faces about the programs that they said they weren't doing, that they were doing. No, they don't exist. No, these slide decks don't exist. No, we weren't expanding atheism in Nepal or in other countries. And then we would get the phone calls after the hearing saying, sorry, we were wrong about that. We were, in fact, doing that. And, sorry that we spent the last however long denying these things that we were doing it, but never apologizing. And never saying this is something that we shouldn't have been doing. This is not true diplomacy. These are just the facts of what has taken place prior to your arrival here. And it's a lot of what brings us to where we are today, is the fact that there has not been oversight at the State Department, and there has not been a comprehensive State Department reauthorization, unfortunately, which is really allowed these programs to continue, whether it's atheism in Nepal or drag shows in Ecuador or transgender job fairs in Bangladesh, or take your pick of the thousands of programs that unfortunately the State Department is wasting American dollars on. Representative Lawler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing today. And certainly as this committee gets about its important work, as chair of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee and with oversight over M-Branch, I certainly am committed to and focused on the importance of a State Department reauthorization. I think the fact is this has been a failure on the part of Congress for many years in both parties to actually reauthorize the work of the State Department to provide the level of oversight that is necessary. And sadly, prior administrations have refused to cooperate. We've had multiple hearings where we have asked administration officials for information. We had Samantha Power here, for instance, as head of USAID, and asked her numerous questions, and no answers provided about expenditures and programs that USAID was conducting itself. So this hearing is immensely valuable, but obviously the work that we are undertaking is important. Right now, the Foreign Service Institute is not a degree-granting institution, unlike many of its service-related counterparts. What would be the benefits of accrediting FSI, and why has this not previously been pursued, and what challenges might, in fact, persist here? Leave it open to any of you to engage.
I'll start with that. I never thought of that as and of course the military does do that with their programs, but they're very different programs. The Command and General Staff Schools, the law colleges, these are year-long programs. They're very academic. They're very focused on the core skills of the profession. The Foreign Service Institute, aside from its superb long-term language training, which is in a separate category, basically does short tradecraft courses. In fact, my main criticism with it is, other than the language training, most of it could be also offered to the Department of Transportation. It's all about processy, managerial, get along with each other stuff. There's almost no training in the diplomatic tradecraft. There's almost no diplomatic history, the other things. If you go to any military college or any military...
Would you push to actually ensure that it engages in that?
Yes, I was actually, did a 6-month course once when we had it briefly modeled on the military 40 years ago. We then got rid of it. If we took a look at how the military does it and those kinds of courses that build long-term expertise in our profession, certainly they should be accredited.
I think the importance of language training for our diplomats who will be interfacing with their foreign counterparts daily cannot be understated. Foreign language training is one of the most crucial aspects of FSI's mission, as you mentioned. How thorough is the foreign language training at FSI, and what can they do better to better equip our foreign service officers?
I think the language program there is excellent. I'm sure everything can use a little bit of reform and making sure it's up to date. But I think it's one of the best things FSI does. I would just, not take your time, but I would follow up on what Jim said, and where I think FSI falls down is making, not giving us necessarily in the Foreign Service the skills we need to do tomorrow's job. It tends to be backward-looking, and the management stuff is very weak. Most people in encounters with FSI during the course of their career is little sort of computerized modules on things that are important but routine, like how to keep your security, your computer safe on security grounds, and how to make sure you're living up to ethics rules. Whereas we need to understand better our core function of diplomacy.
Mr. Hale, can you just describe how the Bureau of Counterterrorism's efforts integrate with broader national security strategies led by the National Security Council or other agencies?
Yeah, I think it was founded in the early 70s. It's one of those examples of an important international activity in which the State Department doesn't actually have the lead. Our domestic agencies have that, and they have their own relationships overseas, which are very important, intelligence and law enforcement and security. But it's very important that we have someone who's helping to coordinate that, make sure our embassies are on point, doing everything possible to defeat terrorism, and that they're at the table in their interagency discussions here in Washington, and I think they're well staffed to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lawler. Mrs. I was told that you had a hard stop at 1 p.m. I don't know if that's something that you need to
Thank you,
adhere to.
Mr. Chairman. I can stay an additional 15 minutes.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony today. Thank you. Representative Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The efforts to make reform and to work together in a bipartisan effort, I think is laudable, and certainly I would encourage that. The State Department reauthorization, though, that is being contemplated at this time seems to be unilateral, lacking any sort of input or input that I can determine from the Congress. We haven't passed a State Department reauthorization, as my colleagues have already noted in previous comments. When we have had reforms, significantly, they've been in the reauthorization, the National Defense Bill, which we tend to have bipartisan support. And that's included efforts in Cyber Diplomacy Act, which we heard about in Europe, which is more critical now than ever. We noted that in what occurred in the last day or two in Portugal and in Spain and France. Secretary Rubio said he was reversing decades of bloated bureaucracy, but I think without the input, and I think there's a lot of bipartisan goodwill here if we would just work together, that would deal with some of the practices they would like to reform. I want to ask a question, and of course, former Chairman McCaul, I think, indicated that as well, and talked about the hurdles that we face in the House and the Senate. But Ambassador Zaya, the Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights and Labor, champions of American values that include the rule of law and individual rights that bring us safer and stronger and more prosperous states. Having you previously worked at DRL, can you tell us why foreign assistance that supports human rights and the rule of law is so important for our own well-being and for trying to maintain stability around the world?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. The rule of law is the basis for order and stability in partner countries. And, I would point out here that DRL has played a very important role in supporting non-governmental organizations, civil society champions, USAID as well. But we've talked a bit about the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. They have also played a very important role on the issue of access to justice, because in many societies, some of the vulnerabilities that violent extremists are able to exploit is the inability of government institutions to deliver justice, to deliver the rule of law.
As President Reagan once said, if we're going to be that beacon of light on the shining hill, we need to stand up for human rights, as President Carter has also indicated during his presidency. Ambassador Jeffries, you led the United States in a diplomatic effort and engagement in Syria crisis, was talked about earlier this morning, and defeating ISIS. Why was humanitarian assistance such a key part of your diplomatic engagement, and what risks do we run in conflicted areas where the U.S. fails to deliver life-saving aid, in your view?
It was absolutely essential. We continued aid with a secretary waiver because it involved, at the time, Hayat al-Sham, which is now led by the guy who's the prime minister, of the president rather, of Syria, because they were on the terrorist list. But nonetheless, it was so important. There were 3 million internally displaced people right along the Turkish border. If they had been pushed into Turkey and on into Europe, we would have had another crisis like we saw in Europe in 2015. The humanitarian assistance was absolutely essential to keeping them there. It was also essential to stabilizing the front militarily in that campaign. Likewise, the assistance we were providing to our Kurdish-led battle allies in the northeast of the country fighting the Islamic State, but also denying terrain to Assad, Iran, and Russia. So this was extremely useful, and it was very, very effectively carried out by USAID.
Well, thank you. And the different tools in our diplomatic toolbox I think we can use, whether we refer to it as smart power or soft power. The fact of the matter is that, Mr. Chairman, I would urge you to try to join in a bipartisan effort to include that we don't abdicate our role in terms of our checks and balances in this effort to reorganize. Something that just bugs me right here recently is these cuts to a historical tool that we used called Voice in America and other efforts to reach out to parts of the world. For the life of me, I can't understand why eliminating that makes any sense. Any of you care to comment?
I would just comment here, Congressman, we haven't talked about the role of Radio Free Asia, which reaches
All of those tools.
hundreds of millions of listeners, particularly in closed societies like China and in multiple languages. And again, the abrupt cutoff of that information, which is penetrating societies where censorship, a government firewall controls all information, it is really an incalculable loss.
Do you all agree?
I agree in the case cited where the platform is the only means to get the alternative information and into those closed societies. I don't believe that that model works in areas such as the Middle East, where the problem isn't penetrating those countries today. They have very active media platforms which we can participate in. And so I think it's very cost effective to make sure that we are making sure that U.S. officials and American voices are heard on those programs. But we don't necessarily need to replicate the model used against authoritarian, totalitarian countries, actually.
I was a liaison officer to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. At the time during the Cold War, it was absolutely essential. Whether it is now essential today, given the, as David mentioned earlier, the variety of different platforms that information is flowing around the world. I think what the administration, any administration, needs to do is, what is our message? Define and determine that, and then figure out what is the best way to get it out there. I'm not so sure it's VOA. I'm not so sure it's Radio Free Europe. What I am sure is we need to get a message out.
I agree. Thank you for your service to our country, and my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Costa, and I will assure the committee again, and you as well, because I know you were speaking about it, State Department reauthorization. We are looking forward to being an extremely member-driven process. All of the members on both sides will have every opportunity to offer their amendments, their suggestions, their ideas, and have the debate about what should be prioritized or not prioritized. And we look forward to your input as well.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Representative Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I am very interested in hearing how Congress can play an increased role in foreign policy by regularly authorizing State Department functions so that its mission and its structure are clear. Back in February, at a hearing held by this committee, I discussed with former Representative Ted Yoho how important it is to have bipartisan consistency and strategy in U.S. foreign policy. And I believe that it's important that America is a key leader in health innovation, and I believe that it's an important foreign policy tool that the State Department should use to America's benefit. A key program that I want to focus on today is PEPFAR. Mr. Jeffrey and Mr. Hale, as Congress and this committee reauthorizes the State Department, what specific authorities or institutional reforms should we include to ensure that PEPFAR's mission of global HIV/AIDS epidemic control continues? And additionally, how can we use the authorizing legislation to strengthen PEPFAR's effectiveness within the State Department, as well as to align it with larger U.S. foreign policy objectives?
I was in the National Security Council when we started PEPFAR back almost 20 years ago, and it's one of the proudest things we've done. The first point is it should continue. The second point is that it is not only of major humanitarian success, but also for global health systems' ability to react to epidemics and such. It is really, really effective as well. I'm not so sure how it feeds into soft power, hard power, but that's not the point. It should be supported by Congress, if necessary, by specific legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Hale.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think it's perhaps most useful to cast it in terms of protecting our nation. Better to fight Ebola in Uganda than in Milwaukee.
So following up on that, Mr. Hale, from your experience, how can we improve PEPFAR's effectiveness as its functions are consolidated, and what can Congress do to ensure that the department is able to manage PEPFAR's large operational footprint?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on PEPFAR, so I hesitate to I can't give a detailed answer. I would want to make sure that as it's transitioned to the State Department, that the State Department is set up to manage it. And that may mean it doesn't look very different than what it looks like today. And Jim touched on a very important point about all this, which is, when I became Undersecretary, I was surprised to see the amount of assistance going to African countries. And when you dig down into it, you see that for the most part, it's about building health infrastructures that do not exist. And without that, it's not just shots in the arm. You have to build a structure that's going to be durable to promote these health strategies.
Okay. So given PEPFAR's track record as one of the most successful U.S. foreign aid projects, Mr. Hale and Mr. Jeffrey, what lessons from PEPFAR's operational model should Congress seek to preserve as foreign assistance programs are restructured within the State Department?
It was set up in a quite focused, targeted, administratively lean way with very specific goals that were concrete and understandable, and a way to measure success, among other things, by the number of people whose lives were saved and people who did not succumb to HIV. So I think those are the guidelines. Again, totally aside from the humanitarian side of it, from the administrative side of it, I think it was a very effective program, and I hope that with all of this reorganization, we find a way to continue that program and at the same level of competence.
I concur.
Okay. And so given PEPFAR's role in strengthening diplomatic partnerships and stabilizing fragile states, Mr. Jeffrey and Mr. Hale, how should Congress seek to accomplish PEPFAR's mission while also streamlining State Department activities?
Again, ensure, whatever verb we use, that the State Department doesn't neglect this as they move it around. But the one thing I would raise, not an objection to, but a question to, is we can't oversell these things. This program deserves to be continued for its humanitarian, and as Dave and I both mentioned, protecting of Americans from epidemics abroad. Whether it buys us all of that much support in these countries, whether it feeds into our larger foreign policy, I'm not so sure there's a lot of evidence to that. It doesn't matter. It's worthwhile in and of itself, but we shouldn't oversell a lot of these things as buying us a seat at the table that we otherwise wouldn't get.
I think that's right.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Kaine. Ms. Zia, did you want to take that chance to? Okay, very good. Representative Kam-Lager Dove.
Thank you. I want to thank the chair, and I want to thank our ranking member. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I want to thank you, Ms. Zia, for extending your time. Given how massive this state reorg proposal is, however, I would much rather be talking to Secretary Rubio. It is his proposal, and he should be here walking us through it. I do agree with the chair that authorizing the State Department is an important function of this committee and reflects the critical role of Congress in shaping our foreign policy, but it is supposed to be a collaborative process. Congress and the administration, input, not dictation. Doge and MAGA extremists have hijacked a bipartisan set of foreign policy priorities to advance a fringe agenda that would never receive bipartisan support. A reorg that axes the value-based bureaus at the State Department is a capitulation to the MAGA culture warriors who view democracy and human rights and the rule of law as part of a woke liberal agenda, not as fundamental American values that distinguish us from our adversaries and make us a leader on the world stage. The arbitrary 15% personnel cuts throughout the department are further proof that Rubio's reorganization is a bending of the knee to Musk and Doge and has little to do with improving the department's efficiency or effectiveness. This slash and burn approach to our diplomatic toolbox reflected in this reorg will have real repercussions for Americans across the country. Red and blue districts nationwide are gearing up to host the upcoming FIFA World Cup and Summer Olympics. And these issues are passionate to me because they're going to be happening in my district as well. And the billions in projected economic impact will disappear if this administration cripples the State Department's ability to process spectators' visas by shuttering diplomatic missions abroad or cutting the department's budget by 50%. The question isn't going to be who will want to come here. The question will be who will be able to come here to attend as fans, as spectators, as participants, as athletes. The harm to my district and everyday Americans of this reckless approach to foreign policy is why I introduced the Defending American Diplomacy Act. My bill would require congressional input and approval if the executive branch wants to undertake a major reorg like this. And it shouldn't be partisan to say that Congress has the constitutional authority to exercise oversight and will do it to make changes like this to our foreign policy toolbox. It should be a no-brainer. Many of us went on CODELs during this past recess. Many of us in our visits with other countries probably heard the same thing, that the United States is leaving a vacuum that China is rushing to fill. I know when I was talking to our international partners, they kept saying the same thing about the United States. Promises made, promises unkept. And it is so simple, I think, and easy to counter the PRC's influence by helping to feed malnourished children, by supporting educational programming, by providing life-saving medicine, small things that make a big difference, and they are real instruments in our diplomatic toolbox. And China is waiting for us to leave. They're saying, give me all that, we can do all of that, and even more. So Ms. Zaya, in the few seconds that I have left, in your time at State, have you ever seen a major reorg like this take place with zero consultation from Congress?
No, I have not. And I was a young diplomat back in the day during the Clinton administration where reinventing government, significantly shifted State Department responsibilities, absorbed USIA and the like. I appreciate your underscoring the areas where U.S. values and interests intersect. And I would just add a few more long-standing responsibilities of the department, such as supporting democratic reformers, supporting free and independent media, supporting free and fair elections, but also new areas, supporting rights-respecting technology. We've touched a bit on the creation of the Bureau of Digital and Cyber Policy. People may not realize it's a very close partner of the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, which has forged for over a decade policy leadership on internet freedom that directly counters Russian and Chinese efforts to create closed systems, remake the international order to their advantage. So the strategic value is not in conflict with our own values.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. And I would also, inform the committee that there has been extensive consultation between the administration and members of the committee and members of the House. Just truthfully, not many members of the Democrat side of this committee. And that's not meant to be a snide comment. It's simply reflective of the fact that the last 4 years were spent with an administration that wasn't talking about the things that they were doing. They were lying about the things that they were doing. And even when this administration came in, they were looking to literally burn and shred proof of what they were doing at State Department and USAID. So I don't think it should be surprising to many that, yes, a large amount of the consultation that's going on is not going on with the people that were cutting the checks to do drag shows in Ecuador or transgender musicals or transgender plays or transgender operas or any of the other things. So it's not that there's not consultation going on, it's just that there's not consultation going on with those that were lying and denying these programs. I will now go to Representative Shreve.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, and thanks to our witnesses. We may not have the Secretary of State, but we have some
terrifically distinguished ambassadors with us. And Ms. Zaya, thanks for spending a little extra time with us. I'm a new member from Indiana and try to keep up with this hearing as we're bouncing back with markup across the hallway in TNI. A plug for my state. We've been blessed in Indiana with ag, corn, beans, pork, but there's more than corn in Indiana. We're a big pharmaceutical producing state. Lilly's in our state. Aircraft engines, automotive, manufacturing is central to our economy. And we've also produced some talent in this space. I interned a lifetime ago for Senator Lugar out here, whom some of you two may have worked with. Lee Hamilton was my congressman back when I was in high school. And I visited with him 2 weeks ago. So we've got some bipartisan talent and a history of that coming out of Indiana and playing in this space. Of course, one of state's core functions is economic statecraft and leveraging America's strength to advance our national interests abroad is part and parcel with what state is all about. This administration's initiatives and this 119th Congress have been focused on right-sizing our federal bureaucracy, and yes, that includes the elimination of some ineffective functions and programs. State Department is no exception. Ambassador Jeffrey, in your view, would our American businesses, mine close to home and more broadly, be better positioned for success in international markets under the current decentralized structure that we have at state today, or through a re-centralization of economic authority within the State Department?
Under the previous organization and under the new organization that Secretary Rubio has proposed, you do have a Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, and you have an Energy and an Economic Bureau under them. But that's also a huge responsibility of each of the regional bureaus and the Regional Bureau Assistant Secretary, and it's one of the core responsibilities of every ambassador to both promote economic integration between country X and the United States, and specifically commercial opportunities for American firms. It's something that we believe very much in, and I think that the way we've set it up is working well. The one change that I've proposed is that the Foreign Commercial Service, which is out there in the field with us and advising the ambassador on how to help American businesses get deals, I think that should be put directly and officially under the Department of State. But beyond that, I wouldn't make any change.
All right. Ambassador Hale, I'm sure you have a perspective on this with your globe-trotting career.
Yes, I do. I think overall, probably centralization would be the way to go. One of my pet peeves, frankly, is that the Foreign Commercial Service has not really stepped up to the game in most places where I worked. And if you talk to corporate America, I don't think they're very impressed with the performance of our embassies in promoting business as a result. So if we can give our ambassadors greater resources in order to help American business overseas, I'm all for it, and I think that means talking to American business about identifying what it is that they need. The thing an ambassador can do is advocacy, but there's a lot of other work that needs to be done to help corporate America have an even playing field, basically, is one of the goals. The other thing I would make an observation on, because I don't think a lot of people pay attention to it, is that we have executive directors at the World Bank, the IMF, the regional banks. They're not very well integrated into our foreign policy team. They really value their independence, and I can understand to a degree why they don't want to be dictated to by a number of agencies. But the level of coordination is really absent beneath the seventh floor level at our State Department. And the seventh floor principals at the State Department don't have the time to give day-to-day guidance when a vote's coming up to the World Bank or what. So if we really want to deal with China and these problems, there needs to be better integration at that level as well.
integration. Ambassadors, thank you. My time's expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Shreve. Representative McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Mast, and of course, Ranking Member Meeks, for both of your leadership, and thank you, ambassadors, for staying with us and allowing us to get to our more junior members. The world is in upheaval, a fact that I believe every member of this committee can probably agree on. According to Armed Conflict Location and Event data, global conflict levels have nearly doubled in the last 5 years. The Council on Foreign Relations predicted that 2025 could be the most dangerous year yet in the 17 years they've conducted surveys on global conflicts to watch. That the current administration has chosen this moment to severely curtail our diplomatic and international development capacity is all the more baffling. More conflict globally makes the United States less secure, and an ever-shrinking U.S. presence globally creates an opportunity for China and Russia to fill that vacuum diplomatically, militarily, and economically. I'm committed to working with my colleagues across the aisle to pursue policies that will make Delawareans and all Americans safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And while we can always do better, and while I believe in reforms to modernize our approach, over the last 101 days, this administration has left us less secure and less respected. Throwing out the alliances, organizations, and investments that fostered one of the longest periods of peace between great powers in human history is a tragic self-own. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can empower the State Department and our diplomatic servants around the world to best advance the interests of American citizens. And I want to focus in on a case study that I think helps to inform some of these conversations. In 2020, the United Kingdom eliminated their Department for International Development, merging it into their Foreign and Commonwealth Office. An independent watchdog said that depleted their capacity for international development. We recently have seen them transfer a large amount of their international development into their defense budgets. So, Ambassador Jeffrey, I'm curious your thoughts around lessons learned from the UK experience and how we can make sure that we're protecting international development as a critical tool for us diplomatically, and avoid what we've seen in the United Kingdom, where there has been a depletion with the merger of those two departments in their international development capacity.
No, again, I'm a fan of putting international development into, be it the Foreign Office in the case of the UK, Australia, and other places do it that way, or as proposed now, putting it into the Department of State. And the reason is there has to be an alignment of the development, because regardless of who's doing it, it's always doing some good for someone, and therefore it's hard to argue against. But the point is, and David has mentioned this several times, what are the effects of it? How do we exploit those effects? How do we build an overall program that contributes to the prosperity and the peace of the American people? And I think that that's best achieved by putting it into the Department of State. Now, how you put it into the Department of State, how you preserve the skills that USAID was able to deploy, and I've seen them very effectively on the ground, that's a different question. But assuming that that is possible in this world, and it is, I think it would be better to put it in.
Yeah, I certainly think in a perfect world, in a vacuum, coordination is obviously something we should foster, and we should foster it organizationally with reforms. I'm just very concerned that we will see a replication of what's happened in the United Kingdom, where they have found that their international development capacity has diminished. I mean, coordination without actual investment is pointless. And we've seen in the United Kingdom them throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's made it easier for them to deplete their international development budget, move it into defense, because it's been merged into these larger budgets. And I'm fearful that this administration will similarly use a consolidation and sort of an enveloping of this money into a larger entity as a means to eliminating these investments entirely. Final question I want to ask both of you. In 2017, Secretary Rubio said, when he was Senator Rubio, "I don't want to see us move towards a foreign policy where human rights only matters when nothing else matters, when something more important isn't standing in our way," end of quote. I'm curious if you agree with then Senator Rubio's points. Ambassador Hale?
Yes, I think advocacy and promoting human rights is a core element of our foreign policy. Anytime our foreign policy gets too far away from our values, we go wrong. It doesn't mean we can always accomplish the goal, but we should continue to have engagement of our partners across the world on this important topic.
Thank you. Since we're out of time, I'll just say I hope Senator Rubio is listened to by Secretary Rubio, but I'm unfortunately not particularly optimistic. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative McBride. Now I'll recognize the Vice Chair of the committee. He and I have both deferred all of our questions until the end, so recognize Representative Issa.
David, we saved the worst for last. We couldn't have two more distinguished ambassadors here with more regional history in addition to your special assignments. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions that are more about how many years you've watched the State Department than necessarily some of the earlier questions. Ambassador Hale, you I think did a good job of explaining that Voice of America, Radio Free, fill in the blanks, we have everything everywhere as though it works everywhere. The idea that we would make a slimmer, targeted one, and one that nimbly might go from a place in which the truth cannot be gotten out any other way to another one. I'm going to throw one question in, not for a long answer, but just for conceptually. When you can get in, like in the Middle East, finding the ways to get those messages in a way that they're heard, I'm going to ask rhetorically, is still critical. The question is that disconnected from the State Department, or is that integral not only to the State Department, but to all the other portions that look overseas, the CIA, the NSA, all these agencies? And if we're going to reinvent Radio Free, fill in the blank, should we reorganize it so that it can, in fact, target the people in what we modernly, look at in social media and so on as influencers? Would that be pretty much that's the new way?
I agree very much with the way you phrased it in the conceptualization. And to answer the question, I think it's a little bit haphazard at State. It really depends on whether there's a specific team dealing with a specific country or issue topic, and whether they have identified that in the way you've thought of it, and they have the right people to advise them. Because, by the way, the way you deliver a message in Saudi Arabia may sound a little different than the way Washington would have thought. But so you need people there who can say, no, yeah, we've got the policy, but this is the way to present it, so you're going to be more compelling to your audience.
Thank you. And I'm going to skip to one that goes back to your earlier years, but sort of mid-career in some ways. Major General Charles Williams, the director of OBO for the Bush administration. Is it fair to say that we previously reinvented the building of safe and effective facilities, and then we have since abandoned them, such that those cost benefits, the speed to market, if you will, that occurred under his, controversial sometimes, but his leadership has been lost?
Yes, I think it's one of the most frustrating experiences I had was dealing with that office over time. And part of it is, of course, they do cling to their independence because they don't want ambassadors to be sort of telling them what to do and having their own motives, so they need to make sure they're doing things properly for OBO standards.
Everybody wants a new office. They want a gold office.
Right, but they're local realities too. But yes, I thought we had basically developed a concept that dealt with the security challenges of today that was costly, but kept our people safe. And so I don't know why we have to keep reinventing that one.
Secretary, I imagine, Ambassador, you would also agree that getting the backlog of embassies and consulates that are effective and safe should be one of the reauthorization priorities over, if you will, continuing to run out of money long before we deal with the backlog.
Absolutely. Ankara was a priority. It was attacked by a suicide bomber some years ago, and he didn't get beyond the first line of defense. So the system can work if you put effort and focus and resources into it.
And my closing question, I always run out of time before I run out of the many questions in this. We all know the sort of biblical truism that if you give a man a fish, it's clear that there were programs each of you understood and embraced that, in fact, for a time gave people fish. But Ambassador Hale, you rightfully so said, don't celebrate 50 years of giving out fish. We all talk about the Marshall Plan and how it took a ruined, unproductive Europe and got it on its feet. As we rebuild aid of all sort, including Trade Development Agency, which I was honored to be nominated to during the Trump administration and so on, where is the balance, in your opinion, between, and should there be a separation between the giving out of fish, giving of medicine, food, and so on, versus programs which claim to be about capability building? And should we really define them differently so that not all programs are equal?
Yes, I mean, I've said this before, but I want to emphasize it again, is that whatever we do, the measurement is not the activity that we're doing. The measurement is the results that we're having based on whatever our policy goal is. And this has been the frustration, I think, for this whole morning, this discussion, is that there are people who want to measure success by how many dollars we've spent and how many people we have spending those dollars. Well, that's important, but it's not the outcome. And you can do things maybe with fewer people and fewer dollars, or maybe you need more dollars and more people. But I don't see that prism very often applied in the business I was in the State Department. And so that, to me, is the key. And it may lead you to more deeper involvement. That's what MCC was all about, was that kind of partnership to build capacity, which can be key.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I can close just with an observation. Shortly after the pause in funding, I was in the Middle East, and I saw two programs that I think say it all. Two people came in two countries. One tried to justify that absolutely we had to turn on the nominally $100 per teacher that was, quote, helping teachers do better work in that country. The other came in and said, we're halfway done building a water facility that will provide clean water in Jordan, as it turns out, to one of the driest and most water resource starved countries. One was just sort of saying, but money does good. The other was saying, you don't want to have a monument to a half-done project sitting out there for years so people can say America reneged and quit. Hopefully, as we do through reauthorization, but also as we go through unpausing some programs with the Secretary, we will look at that question in that light of, was it nice to have, or is it essential that we see and be given credit for the good work in some cases we're doing that changes lives? So, Mr. Chairman, thanks for your indulgence, and I look forward to your closing remarks.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Issa, and truthfully, your closing remarks lead very well into the nature of my questions. I've deferred my questions to the end. I've really enjoyed hearing the testimony, the questions, and the answers, and the dialogue back and forth. And a lot of it goes to, and this is where it segues to my friend Mr. Issa, the old sentiment that if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. And for each of us, of which nearly every member of this committee had questions, and every member of this committee that was here responded that they absolutely believe in the necessity for a State Department reauthorization. It's unanimous across everybody here. I can tell you things that I think we should deprioritize, largely individual grants, like grants for sex change surgeries in Guatemala, or Sesame Street in Iraq for $20 million, or teach gender inclusivity through Ultimate Frisbee for $100,000. I don't know how many Frisbees you get for $100,000, or helping Indonesian coffee companies become more gender-friendly for $425,000, right? The point is, I could say there's very specific individual grants and things that I disapprove of, and there are very specific programs that I say, I prioritize these. I don't know that there's a number that we could put on it where it doesn't scale to doing more and more great things like Development Finance Corporation or other things. And so that's where the nature of my questions go to each of you, and we'll do one and one, see how far down the line we get. But if we could just start, Ambassador Jeffrey, give me something that you would say, I really think this should be deprioritized and juxtaposed. Something I really think that this should be on the high end of the priority list. And then likewise, Mr. Hale, and I'd just love to hear you all, give us the back and forth of where you'd prioritize and deprioritize.
Again, I will seek refuge in this Economist article because it is not only middle of the road, I would say it's more on the progressive side normally, but its findings are quite dramatic. And it gets to Congressman Issa's point, and that is, I both delivered fish, that was one reason for our success in Syria, the humanitarian programs, and I've been out there trying to teach people how to fish. That's very hard to do. That gets to David's point, what are the effects? Do we really know what supply chain, what managerial models, what will actually make that work in not just in country X, but in village Y or in district Z? I've spent 9 years in Turkey and 9 years in Germany. I speak both languages well. I don't begin to really know how those societies tick as an outsider. It's very hard for us to do these kind of broad development, social, political assistance and claim that we're really seeing effects. There is where I would de-emphasize, and I would focus again on humanitarian assistance, giving people fish, keep them alive so that they can eventually figure it out for themselves, and security assistance.
Representative Hale, or Ambassador Hale?
I would say that you do have to tailor what we're doing to the specific theater that we're operating in, and so what you want to do in Mexico may be very different than what you want to do in Vietnam. But to me, where it's easiest to demonstrate the link between outcomes, inputs and outcomes, is things like the security sector, globally, law enforcement, same thing. Harder to make that link, but I know in my bones that it is extremely beneficial to America to invest in education, and particularly to expose as many people as we can through American educational tools, including universities that are overseas like AUB or AUC. And economic assistance that is linked to developing a robust private sector to the extent we can in a country if they're actually committed to doing it, because that's where we're value added. Talk about competing with China, it's not how much money we spend. It's how do we make sure that these countries are able to compete on their own and not be penetrated by China. I would get rid of, to the greatest extent possible, the things that are, we basically building new governance structures for countries. We've tried and failed. So that whole world of democracy and state building, I think, is of limited utility.
Thank you. And I think, some of what you said today, I've really enjoyed, again, the dialogue, the testimony, and I think a lot of it goes to, we are looking to build partners. We're not looking to build permanent dependencies. And that's something that we shouldn't celebrate. And it's something that we need to be reflective of, what is the duration that this dependency has been going on? And what has been, is the dependency decreased? Has the dependency only increased? And if we're not reflecting on those things in every Congress and allowing representatives to review these programs that are being undertaken by the executive branch and the State Department and evaluating their effectiveness, then not only, I think, are we setting ourselves up for failure in diplomacy, but we're also failing to be good stewards of the people that fund every single program, which is the taxpayer of the United States of America. Again, I'll thank you all for your testimony. I'm going to go to my closing remarks. And simply, I know we've had all of the members of this committee depart, but I have assured all of them numerous times that as we talk about State Department reauthorization, it's going to be a member-led process. Absolutely, we've been having many conversations with the administration to this point about direction and things that we've rooted out in oversight over the years and why things should change in this place or that place. And we're going to continue to have those dialogues with the administration right up until the point that this bill is written and beyond. And they're going to continue to work from their lane in doing what they can to make sure that they are good stewards and making sure that what we do in foreign policy policy is foreign policy that works to put America first, that it makes sense for Americans and makes us the partner of choice for these countries and not a pariah with these countries that we're undertaking diplomacy in, and assure these members, every member that there will be, portals and opportunity for every single one of them to input their amendments, their ideas, their thoughts, their, whatever it is that they want to add or detract from in this bill. And we look forward to making sure that we hear from each and every one of them and hopefully find that no members are silenced or precluded from offering the policies that they want to put forward, as sometimes takes place with minorities. They sometimes don't want to participate because then they had to say they were a part of the process, and I hope that's not the case of what takes place here. I do thank each of you for your valuable testimony, and I do thank again all the members for their questions, and members of the committee